Welcome to the judicial candidates today. Today we have, it looks like 6 candidates for the Office of Superior Court Judge of different numbers. They'll tell us individually which one they're up for. And we're delighted to have you. We have lots of questions as to the entire electorate about how is it that judges are running for office and what's that experience like. So I think we start by each doing a short introduction, and then we can open it up to the floor for some questions. When I say short, I mean what seems like the right length, 2-3 minutes?
Yeah.
Fair enough. So we'll do 2 or 3 minutes a person, and we'll start with Linda's son, who's here. So let's take it without further ado.
Okay, would you like me to, I'll stand.
Yeah, you can stand,
Okay.
sure.
Hi, good evening. My name is Linda Sun. I'm running for seat number 42. I am a Deputy Attorney General with the State of California Department of Justice. And my area of specialty is in consumer protection litigation. And I've been with the Department of Justice for 19 years now. And I've prosecuted close to 1,000 cases from beginning to end. I've regularly appeared in administrative, civil, and appellate courts in the prosecution of professional licensees under the umbrella of the Department of Consumer Affairs and its 40 different agencies like Contractors State License Board, Veterinarian Board, Nursing Board, Optometry Board, Pharmacy Board, you name it. So my line of work is akin to malpractice, civil malpractice areas, and we have to be very knowledgeable in all the 40 different occupations and trades. And in my spare time, I am an avid volunteer to help the underrepresented in my community, and I've been on 4 or 5 boards, and I've raised a lot of money to help anywhere from pet rescue to youth leadership. And I have been endorsed by 150 different judges, organizations, and elected officials. And I also want to stress that the endorsements are very important because they're very hard to come by. And the individuals or the organizers, we had to go through a very arduous vetting process to earn the endorsement of these individuals and organizations. And I have been endorsed by 2 newspapers, the Metropolitan News Enterprise, which is a legal newspaper, and the Sentinel News, which is down in Culver City. I've been endorsed by 4 bar organizations, including the Mexican American Bar Association, Mexican American Bar Association PAC, it's a political action committee, and I've been endorsed by a lot of Latino leaders, congressional members like Nanette Parseghian and Speaker of the House Rendon. Yes.
Yeah, that's
it.
good.
Thank
Intro.
you.
Excellent. We'll go down the
That's
line.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself and give us
Yes.
a couple minutes.
I don't know, am I in the,
I think you're in the line. Yep.
okay?
You're good.
Yes, I'm Administrative Law Judge Clint James McKay. I'm running for seat number 80. My background is that I have 2 undergraduate degrees, a dual undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan with honors. I have a law degree from Wayne State University, Detroit, and I have an MBA from Berkeley. So I currently do healthcare disputes. That's sort of my specialty. Before that, I was also with the Department of Justice. I prosecuted doctors. I was also the statewide liaison for the Board of Psychology, the Emergency Medical Services Authority, and the Board of Acupuncture. In my current position, I decide cases where people have been insured by Medi-Cal or covered by Medi-Cal, and then their coverage is ended. People who are under the Affordable Care Act and have covered California insurance policies, and then for some reason there's a dispute. That's what I've done for the last 5 years. I've decided over 2,000 cases as a judge. I've also been a judge pro tem for the Superior Court of Los Angeles County. I was also an arbitrator at the AAA for over 20 years. I am also rated well qualified by the Los Angeles County Bar Association, and I'm the only one in the race so rated. My 2 opponents have been rated qualified. I'm the only one who's rated well qualified. So my emphasis and the reason I ran is that I feel that there needs to be a diversity in the bench. There needs to be someone other than former prosecutors, no offense, former prosecutors or current prosecutors, who are judges. They're great prosecutors. All the people here are excellent prosecutors, but I think there needs to be diversity in the bench. I think there needs to be people who understand poverty, who have worked with people who have trouble with medical care. That's what I do every day. And so that's what I really want to do on the bench. I think that it's important that we not be considered and judged by the worst thing we've ever done, as Brian Stevenson says. We have to have people who understand that people make mistakes and have the two things in mind when we're deciding criminal cases, for example. We have to understand public safety. We have to understand that the purpose of the criminal law should be, isn't now, but should be, to bring people back into productive membership of society, to make them people who can once again contribute and not throw them away. They're not garbage. We need to bring people back and help them re-enter society. In addition to protecting public safety, we have to have both things going on. And that's my focus as far as that goes.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Say your name one more time.
Clint James McKay, office number 80.
Okay.
Is this being broadcast or recorded?
It's being recorded and then
It
we're gonna
is.
put it on
Okay,
the
am I
website.
in frame?
You're in frame.
Okay,
You're in frame. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Linda's got to go.
no problem. Okay, so I'll address you there at home or wherever you are, as well as the people here who are attending. My name is Tom Parsekian. I'm running in seat number 150, LA County Superior Court. The endorsements I'm quite proud of I've been endorsed by the LA County Democratic Party. I've been endorsed also by the major unions, all the major unions really that one can get an endorsement from, the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, the SEIU, which is the service organization, is very important, SEIU Local 721. Also AFSCME 36, what does that mean? Well, those are the court workers, the court employers, court workers and administrative staff and whatnot. AFSCME DC, which is District Council 36, endorsed me as well. I'm very proud of that, as well as many trades and councils. So I have a lot of working families, working members of unions that have endorsed, as well as the LA County Democratic Party. As far as individuals go, I've been endorsed by Adam Schiff, which is a very proud endorsement of mine. He's known me for about 10 years, as well as Maxine Waters is endorsed as well. Other elected officials in the city of LA, Paul Koretz and Paul Kerkorian, have also endorsed. So those are all great endorsements. But what's really feels good, though, is I've also been endorsed by, I think, 18 or 20 Democratic clubs throughout the county of Los Angeles. And those are places you go from Lancaster to Long Beach, from Pomona to Santa Monica, to go out there, hit the pavement, meet the voters. They look at you, they hear from you, you submit papers to them about who you are, and then they vote. And you have to get either 60% or more to get their endorsement. And I'm proud to say that I've been able to land every one of those ones that I fought for out there, so I'm really thrilled about that. I'm not just an attorney, I'm also a mediator. I've been practicing law, by the way, for the last 30 years. Next year will be my 30th year. But in the last 4 years, 3.5 years really, I've been a mediator. And a mediator's a little bit different. There you don't have a judgment or decision, you don't advocate, you have to bring two disputing parties together and find common ground. Those two circles have to meet in order for you to have a resolution. I'm very proud of the work that I've done as a mediator. And by the way, I will say that I really feel that going from being an advocate to being a mediator is a great transition to then ending up on the bench. It gives you some great skills as well. I've also been qualified by the LA County Bar Association, which I'm thrilled about. And as far as why I'm running for LA County Superior Court is I do believe that you need people with a breadth of experience on the court. And I've done just about every area of the civil law you can imagine, from intellectual property to immigration law to medical malpractice to inverse condemnation and eminent domain, which is a particular subspecialty of mine. So I do think, as I close, to tell you that it is important to have your fingers in all of those various areas of the law, because when you sit as a judge, you're going to have to pull that information in.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Say your name as you sit down again.
Tom Parsekian, seat number 150.
Exactly.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name's Steve Morgan. I'm running for seat number 72. I'm currently a deputy district attorney for Los Angeles County, but I started off my career as a criminal defense attorney in private practice and also for the Army. And I've been in the Army for the past 14 years in the reserves. I actually served on 2 different occasions, 9 months each time in Iraq in 2009, and then I went back in 2017. And I was selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel last year for my service in the Army. So I'm proud of that. With regard to my qualifications, as folks have talked about, LA County Bar Association, they evaluate us. So think about if you had to list basically 75 of your colleagues. So that's what we had to do. We had to give them 75 of our colleagues' names, and then they talk to all 75 people and evaluate you. And you can either basically get not qualified, qualified, well qualified, or extremely well qualified. And I'm proud to report that I received a well qualified rating from the Bar Association. In addition to that, I received some endorsements. I learned today that I was endorsed by the LA Times, and they have an evaluation process where they talk to you and that sort of thing. And I'm proud of that as well. So I've got a variety of experience. Like I say, I was a criminal defense attorney for about 6 years. I've been a prosecutor with LA County since 2012. And I also teach law right now. I teach criminal law as well. So yeah, Steve Morgan, seat 72. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies first.
Good evening. My name is Emily Cole. I'm running for seat 76. I am a local for Los Angeles. I grew up in San Gabriel Valley, and my husband and I moved just down the street here when we got married. And one of the reasons why I'm running for judge is I want to continue to serve my community. I've been serving my community as a district attorney for the last 13 years. For the majority of that time, I've been prosecuting child and adult sex crimes. I prosecute the worst of the worst, the child molesters, the serial rapists, and I help the most vulnerable of our victims get through one of the most worst times in their lives, get them through the criminal justice process, and help them get justice. Right now, I also help coach a mock trial team for a high school. We are going through our competition on Monday and Tuesday. I'm super excited for them. I can see my little lawyers. I want to be a judge because I want to help other people. I want to continue to help victims of crime, but I want to help the defendants that go through the system. We have an extraordinary mental ill defendant problem. The mentally ill defendants that go through the process need treatment rather than jail. The drug addicted defendants that come through our program are not being given the programs that they need. If they're given the programs that they need, then we won't see them returning into the criminal justice process again and again and again. And that helps us, and that helps them. I want to serve my county. I want to do this for the right reasons, to help the right people. My opponent you won't see here today because my opponent doesn't run. He's not campaigning. He is running on his name, which is Judge Mike Cummins, because 2 years ago he changed his first name to Judge. His original name was Michael Richard Cummins, and 2 years ago he changed it to Judge Mike Cummins. And he's not even from Los Angeles County, he's from San Luis Obispo. He lives and worked there, and he's not here today because he doesn't care what is going on in this county. He doesn't care about us, and he doesn't care about our issues. He just wants to run on his name. So I'm here to meet other people and let them know who I am and my experience and why I'm right for this county as a judge. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Great. Mr. Yang?
What office?
Oh, Emily Cole, seat 76.
Thank you, sir. You want to talk?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Yang, and I'm running for seat 162. So on the ballot, I'm essentially the last office, and if you go by alphabetical order, I would be the last person you would look at. So I am a deputy district attorney. I've been with the LA County DA's office now for approximately 12 years. I'm currently assigned to the Sex Crimes Division. I work with Ms. Cole. We're in the same unit. I started with the District Attorney's Office handling misdemeanors, and I've had experience in terms of dealing with a whole myriad of criminal cases, misdemeanors all the way to capital murder. My most notable case is a case of Gabriel Fernandez. I'm certain you all have heard of the 8-year-old boy in Palmdale who was tortured and murdered by his mom and her boyfriend. That was a case that I'm very proud to have found justice for little Gabriel. Prior to becoming a district attorney, I spent 5 years in private practice. I handled real estate litigation. I have appeared in both state as well as federal courts. I believe Mr. Parseghian, Mr. Morgan, my colleagues here have somewhat of the same experience. Judge McKay had stated that most of us are DAs, and the reason why DAs are good candidates for the bench is because we're in court every day. That's basically our second home, away from home. When we go to work, we're in court. And all of us are very comfortable being in court. We're comfortable with looking at the law to the point where we can almost sometimes sort of predict and see what is coming down the pipe. We can sort of look at the attorneys. We have a relationship with attorneys. We have a relationship oftentimes even with the defendants. So that's what kind of make us uniquely qualified for the position. Of course, there are other things that would make other candidates qualified as well. Mr. Parseghian is extremely experienced, and for his seat, he would be extremely qualified for that. I am endorsed by the LA County Democratic Party, most of the labor unions. I've been rated well qualified by the LA County Bar Association. And Mr. Morgan spoke about 75 names that we give to the bar, but they do more than just call and evaluate the 75 references. They call our opponents. They ask for a list of cases that we've handled. They speak to the judges whom we've appeared before and ask them about our temperament, our competence, our ethics. Are we ethical attorneys? And based upon all of that information, they come out and they provide us with what they believe is the most accurate rating that reflects how we've done in our careers. And with that, Scott Yang, I am running in seat 162.
Before you sit down, does anybody have a specific question for Mr. Yang, or we'll just go to the group?
I have a general.
Sure, go for it.
I was just curious for the judicial seats, is it the same thing for in the primary that you have to get 50%
Yes.
plus one to avoid a runoff?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're in a runoff, just like a legislative candidate.
That'll be in November.
Right.
For seats that have more than 2
Right.
candidates.
For example, I won't be in a runoff. One of us will get 50 point plus one.
Right, because there's only 2.
But Mr. Yang is in a race with 3 people, so he could get 50 plus one,
That's all mine.
you know?
So here,
I think all of us here, the men, Ms. Cole is the only person who's got one additional opponent. And as she correctly stated, he did go out of his way to change his name so that way he can feel like he's a judge.
Because, voting for judges, I always find hard. I find if I don't have anything mailed to me, I find myself seeing what they do.
Right.
And certainly, like you say, somebody from the DA's office always, to me, gives a lot of credibility. But for somebody to change their name to judge, I mean, it's like he wants somebody to think, who's just going by names, to think he's an incumbent.
Let me take a step farther than that. Ms. Cole's opponent went beyond that. Initially, what he did was he tried to just put his career, what he was doing, his occupation, as retired, trying to imply to the voters, Mr. Montalban is here as well, trying to convey at least this sort of nebulous image of himself that he is a retired judge. And the courts actually forced him to state specifically what he was doing, which is he is an attorney.
Right.
And a retired attorney. And he basically landed on retired counsel at law. So he's hoping that even at that point that counsel at law would be something a little bit more deceptive. And it says a lot about his integrity.
Yeah.
All the people right here, I'm sorry.
No.
all the people, everyone here, including Mr. Montalban, who's running in for seat 145. Am I correct, Mr. Montalban? Okay. We take the time to get to the community so that we can speak to you. And I agree with you. Judge elections, judge races, judicial races is probably one of the most difficult to pick because it's an important position. All of us here are trying to seek a position where we get to make a decision ultimately from a speeding ticket.
Have a seat for a minute.
Of course.
You want to slide in because we may as well have a big party. And
You
then we're
gotta
gonna get to
stand
some
right there
questions.
so the camera
Yeah,
can see.
give us a little introduction if you're ready.
Okay, 2 or 3 minutes.
Mr. Montalban, yeah, for 2 or 3 minutes, just about who you are.
Sorry, I wasn't planning on speaking today. I have a fundraiser on the other side of town because I understand that there may be some other dates that are available.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think you said the 26th and the 27th
Yeah.
on the
Would you rather
email.
not speak now? That's fine, or just give us a brief introduction.
I could just give you a brief introduction.
Sure.
I'm running in C-145. I'm a deputy district attorney. I've been a deputy district attorney for over 12 years, I think similar to some colleagues here. I'm in the gang unit, and I got into the gang unit specifically to try to help our community because in the gang unit, the majority of the people that we prosecute are people of color. And I think that we need more people of color to also be district attorneys so that we can have a voice at the table. So that's what we do, because especially me, I grew up in a humble neighborhood where we didn't have a lot of money. So I understand some of these cases and some of these people that get involved in these kind of crimes, where they're coming from. So I feel like I'm in a particularly good spot to be able to assess what the liability is of each of the individuals. And these are all fine people, so you're not going to have a tough time deciding between these people.
Well, thank you very much, and it's nice that you're such a collegial group that seems to like each other. Do you have other questions from the crowd?
So one of my biggest things that I advocate for personally is civic engagement and getting people involved. And something that Ms. Cole said, you were hosting a mock debate.
Mock trial.
A mock trial. So at a time when it feels like kind of the rule of law is like on shaky grounds and we're all a little bit scared of what's going to happen in November and later, not only are you all running for a judge position, but you all be the expert advocates for the profession itself. And so similar to having a mock trial, what things have you done or things that you plan to do to just be an advocate for the career itself for the next generation?
Well, I'll just tell you that now, every year we have this school, the County of Los Angeles puts people in schools to talk to students about the law and what it means. They give us cases, and it goes around, and so I'm doing that this year again, and along with my wife, who's also a lawyer, although I'm not a lawyer anymore. I'm a judge now, but when I was a lawyer. And so we go to the schools and we talk to students. That's where you're going to win the game. You're not going to win the game with people who are already jaded. You're going to win the game with the students. You're going to win the game with the younger people, because those are the ones, when they come up, they have to understand that the system is theirs. And they can either be advocates for the system, or they can sit back and let it collapse around them. And so that's where you're going to win it. You're going to win it in the schools. Like Mr. Montalban says, you start with helping, you come from those kind of backgrounds, you help the people who are disenfranchised, you help the people who don't understand the system to understand the system, how it works, what their role is in it. That's where you win it, in my view. I'm sorry, I talked too much.
No, that's okay. Also, I'm going to focus on your exact question, which is what we need to do to advocate for the judiciary. Because it's really an area that I really feel passionate about. I mean, I'm seeing it, going through this process, and I've been campaigning for 9 months, I've seen in the election process that you're all wondering, how does it all work, things that need to be improved. Like, for instance, how could somebody end up on the ballot who has changed his name to Judge something, and end up being on the ballot that way? I understand it was appealed to the court, in the courts. I think a wrong decision made by the judge in that instance to allow that to go forward. I think that was quite a misjustice, actually an injustice. But that needs to be dealt with. And how do you deal with that statutorily? I've already talked to state senators. Ben Allen is actually one of my supporters. He just endorsed me. But I've had a long talk with him over the holiday about things that I've seen in the process that need to be improved. Are 10 years enough? That's the minimum, 10 years as a lawyer to be able to run for judge. I mean, that's a question. Maybe it is. I don't know. I think one needs to consider that, because I think if you're going to be a judge,
where you're making decisions that are going to affect people's lives. As one person, you're rendering a judgment. Go to jail, not go to jail, lose your money, not lose your money, lose your reputation, not lose your reputation. I think that you want to have a certain amount of years of experience in the world dealing with people to have that kind of sense. And even judges make decisions on witnesses, you know, whether they're credible or not. So I think things like that are out there for improvement. The actual process of being elected to be a judge, you know, I think is important. So, you know, looking at the process from the inside out, I think there can be improvements in how judicial elections are run, and also getting you people informed. How is it that people go into the booth to vote for really the most important election, right? Elected officials come and go. Some of them term limits. What? Judges end up on the bench for 6 years. Federal judges end up on the bench for life. So these are the elections you really need to know who the heck is running, right? So I would definitely like to be an advocate for the judiciary to try to get the electorate more informed, more easily informed, so you're not picking a name because it's maybe a cute name or a title or what have you. I think that's really important, so
Great.
we'll definitely work on that, yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the city?
Although Mr. Parseghian has a very cute name, so he's
I think two things, and I share Tom's assessment of how this system can be improved. But from my perspective, one way, a good way to help society and the community as a whole is, I spent a short period of time in juvenile court, and I see what goes on in juvenile court in terms of what happens to a child who's brought into the juvie system, and how the court system works in terms of we want kids to grow up, we want kids to change, and we want to help the children so that they do not graduate to become an adult offender. And oftentimes, judges aren't proactive enough in terms of reaching out to the kids. I've always wondered why judges don't go out and speak to the children, go out to the camps and speak to them, to have a relationship with them where, you know, oftentimes they don't have a role model at home, and the judge is the one who gets to send them to camp or to send them home. But that juvenile really doesn't get the feel as to whether or not the judge even cares about them. And so I think that one of the things that I would do is ensure that there's a relationship, not between the judge and the child alone, but the probation officer, they call it wraparound services, to really make sure and support that child from the time that he enters the criminal justice system to the time that he leaves, that he doesn't, graduate to something bigger. And that's important to me. I think that's the way to really stop this cycle where someone goes into the juvenile system and then graduates. So,
The only thing last thing I would say to you is that I just I wholeheartedly agree with you just about the concept of being concerned about the rule of law. So part of the reason that I ultimately decided to run was both times I was in Iraq, I worked with Iraq's judiciary and their criminal justice system. And there's nothing magical about our system and the rule of law in the United States. I mean, we actually have a very good system. But the only thing that's going to maintain the system going forward is the people that are willing to participate in the system. I mean, it's not the words on paper, it's not any of that. It's the folks that are actually participating in the system and the culture they create. So, and I don't think folks realize quite what a knife edge it is between having a functioning rule of law system and tipping into a system where somebody comes into court and they either stay in custody or they get out of custody depending on what tribe they're in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an important issue, and I think it's part of the reason just about all of us probably decided to jump into this and do it.
I have a dumb question.
There are no dumb questions, and that's true.
But it's, believe me. But are we looking at, many of you are DAs, and I think we're talking a lot about criminal law and sentencing, but are these county judge seats criminal
more
or
time?
civil or both?
So, no, we could be placed anywhere in the county in any type of a court. It's at the pleasure of the presiding judge, now Kevin Brazil, in a year it will be Eric Taylor. So while a lot of us are criminal attorneys, some of us are not, they will take that into consideration, but it's not a guarantee. I personally would like to go to family law initially. There's a lot of crossover with the type of things that I have been doing, and I really think that that's a good step over. And we need a lot of really good family judges. I think that there's a shortage of that, and so once you're a lawyer that has been in court and knows the in and outs at least of the evidence code and knowing procedure and how things work, we've all been to law school. All we need to do is just brush up a little on the things that we already knew, and then we're off to the races. But yes, we could be anywhere.
A little follow-up on that, which is that if you've got a presiding judge, Kevin Brazil mentioned, is he making those decisions independently, literally, or is there a...
Well, I mean, they have other, they have supervising judges at the civil court, they have criminal court. They have supervising judges as well.
Okay.
So I'm sure that the civil supervising judges, the criminal supervising, I'm sure, pitch in with their...
Sure.
Because you're talking about 500 judges.
That's what I'm thinking. It's an
500.
enormous role.
Yeah.
And to land on one person's
No.
desk, it raises the question of, are you all forced in your, whether you become judges or to, play a political game in order, do judges have to hold on to their courtrooms? Are there more desirable courtrooms, or is there such a, freeway duty? Does those things come up?
Yes.
Yes.
It does.
To everything you just said.
All's true.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you seem perfectly upstanding and big.
I think the first thing is that Judge Brazil, from what I've heard him say, is that the needs of the individual branch courts go first. So if there is a need for judges in a particular court, an example would be Antelope Valley. It's probably the least desirable assignment for judges. Unless, of course, if the judge lives nearby, then that individual would be sent there. And then, sometimes if there's a need in family law, Ms. Cole would go, and then they would look at in terms of where her strengths are. And it's quite possible she might go back to a criminal court once opens up and she has a background in criminal. Mr. Parseghian obviously has a breadth of experience in a wide variety, and Judge McKay obviously has a breadth of experience as well. So yes, and then of course if you are a judge who have a lot of experience, a lot of prestige, then you get the most desirable assignment, which would be the 9th floor in the
Downtown?
CCV downtown.
Oh, is that right? That's considered...
High profile.
I can keep, I have lots of questions, but I want to open it up. Yeah, okay. Anyone? Sir, hey, you have a question, or you're getting ready? Stand by. Okay, great. Go for it.
So just to understand, so any of you could also be trying criminal trials?
Yeah.
Yes.
So here's my question. I feel like our society, for some reason, we tend to sway towards punitive punishment for a lot of things, as solutions for a lot of things criminally. Do you have any sort of, or can you weigh in on the difference between whether you would want more punitive punishment as an answer for these cases, or more restorative justice?
Well, you already know my answer, right? You already know my answer.
You did hint at it, yeah.
Yes.
We're going to be preventative.
Punishment doesn't work, right? It creates recidivism. The only thing that works is to train these people to help them become new, productive members of society. It's the only thing that works, in my view.
So, it depends. I've had violent defendants that are extraordinarily mentally ill. And I've had my experts tell me that but for that mental illness, they wouldn't have committed that violent crime. I absolutely believe that person needed and still needs to get treatment, because if but for that mental illness, they would be a normal participating person in our society. So absolutely that person needed treatment despite the fact that they committed a violent crime. However, then there's the other side of someone who has molested 5 girls over the last 20 years. That person needs to be in prison because they have demonstrated over the last 20 years that any girl under the age of 12 that they come in reach of, they're going to molest that girl. And that person needs to stay in prison for the protection of society. So it is very fact specific and it's very person specific, because if you look at all those different factors and you make that decision, and I feel like perspective has a lot to do with that, seeing how you've dealt with cases before in that way and having dealt with those cases, that's very important when it's time to make those decisions as a judge.
Certainly, protection of society is important, and that's what she's saying. And I'm sorry to paraphrase you. But it's also important that we are, if we're talking about the primary focus, right? There are people, as she says, who can't be rehabilitated, right? They're going to commit crimes. Those people, as she says, have to stay in prison. But what's the primary focus? It's a flow chart, right? Can we rehabilitate this person? And a lot of times that question doesn't even get asked, right? The answer may be no, but it's not asked enough. That question should be always asked. And as she says, if somebody's a sequential molester of children, then the answer to that question may be no. That person can't be rehabilitated. But we need to ask the question. We need to focus on, our focus needs to be at first, can this person re-enter society successfully? If they can't, they can't. But that ought to be the first question we ask. To me.
One of the, I'm sorry, if I may, one of the things that I think DAs oftentimes, prosecutors tend to be much more, and no offense to Tom or Mr. McKay, DAs tend to be a little bit more, I think, in tune with being on the bench. And historically, we've always been the group that sought the bench. Is DAs, our job is not to put people in prison, believe it or not. Okay, our job is to seek justice. And it sounds corny when we say that, but when we look at a case, we make recommendations as to what the proper sentence ought to be. And we do look at a myriad of things. And oftentimes we will, I tend to look at people as an individual, not a number, right? I look at a person's rap sheet. I look at a person, how the crime was committed. The pillowcase rapist in Palmdale swore up and down, if you let him go, he's going to do it again. And he did, twice. And so an individual like that needs to be incarcerated. However, I do believe that we don't have enough mental health hospitals in California. Major problem. There's only one in LA County. It's in Norwalk. There's another in San Bernardino County, Patton State Hospital. We don't have facilities to send individuals who are absolutely mentally ill. And they say that I would not have committed the crime but for my mental health issues. What do we do with that person? We incarcerate, our numbers of incarceration goes up. We let them out in society without supervision. Person comes into my home, does something bad to me, the judge or the DA gets blamed, right?
Speaking of blaming the DA, what would you recommend to residents of Studio City who are also facing a district attorney challenge at the moment? There's Jackie Lacey, George Gascon, and Rachel Rossi are all advocating to be the next district attorney. Do you have strong feelings? Do you think that Jackie Lacey's been doing a good job?
We can't say.
Yeah, we're not allowed to.
We're not allowed to say.
Okay, fine.
There is a code of
And
judicial
believe me,
ethics.
we have very strong opinions,
Okay,
one way or
guess.
the other.
We'll try to guess. Let me then shift to the question about family law for a minute.
Yes.
In Sweden, over there in Scandinavia, they don't have family law, essentially. They don't fight. Families don't rip at each other to the tune of as much money as they have sometimes. What is it that we can learn? I mean, I don't think that anybody thinks that the family law system here is working great. Maybe that's why you'd like to go into that field. But what can we do to make it so that mediation and preserving families is the priority, even though I think the attorneys force families into a weird place where they devour them.
Well, the structure of the system is litigious, right? I mean, our system is
Adversarial.
litigious. Right, adversarial, right? And that's what you have, that's what you have. And so if you want to change that, then you have to do two things. You have to change the structure, and you have to change the mindset. Because somebody coming out of a marriage who's just discovered that their spouse has done some bad thing, whatever that bad thing might be, they want their pound of flesh. There has to be a change in a mindset saying, let's, as you say, in Scandinavia, they have all kinds of weird ideas, like universal health care. Who would have thought, right? All these weird ideas, right? The mindset is different. The mindset is, I got to win. It's not that. It's, let's figure out what the best solution is. That's a different mindset, right? And if you start out with, I got to win, I want my pound of flesh, you're going to end up in an adversarial proceeding.
But that's a litigant. Litigants are just people.
Yeah, honestly.
But then you change the structure.
You need to put people on the bench like Emily, right? So people who have empathy, who have understanding, who've dealt with family issues from the inside, seen all the problems that can happen. And I tell you that because I have had a lot of cases in family court, and I got to tell you, it's a whole different thing. There's a probate code, their own laws in a sense, and I will tell you that it's its own fiefdom.
I mean family.
Family law, in the family courts.
There's two things. There's the child court.
Oh, yeah.
for the-
Well, I've also
That's different.
had a lot of litigation with the probate code.
Yeah.
I've done trusts, wills, estates, I've been in there, and I don't like it, to be
But
quite
is there a
honest.
big idea we can adopt from the Scandinavians? I mean, is there anything that we can do to make it so that people, when they come through the door at the courthouse, are not going to deplete their resources?
You know,
instead of
honestly,
overseas?
I just finished, remember I mentioned early on that I've been doing mediation for the last few years? I just concluded successfully a mediation between a couple. There were assets in Puerto Rico and assets in California. So I had to deal with that, right? And brought them together. The reason I bring up mediation is I do believe in that, by the way. I believe in mediation because what I've seen myself. And I successfully got these two parties to resolve everything amicably at the end of the day. I can't divulge because of the confidentiality. What I can tell you is the process of mediation, I would like to see that be more encouraged, put it that way.
Well, structure.
The
It should
process
be a
of mediation
structure.
involves going to Puerto Rico for private time.
Yeah, I know, but not just encourage, but I would say the structure has to be set up to foster mediation or to require mediation, so that you start out with mediation. And only in a situation where you can't resolve it do you end up in litigation. I mean, but there ought to be a difference in the mindset of people as to what they expect from the process, and also a change in the structure to encourage resolution.
Yeah.
Resolution through
I think
mediation,
you're right,
rather than resolution to
Yeah, I
a
think
judgment.
particularly with family law, you're correct. I think in that area, there can, because we have in our system anyway, where you have, do you want to go to mediation, you mark a box, you're not, but nobody ever does, and then they end up fighting, in civil law or whatever. But I think in family law, I think you're right, that maybe there could be a restructuring of that. So it does encourage, not just encourage, but kind of almost force people to kind of get into a mediation setting in family law. Because I really do believe, from what I've seen personally, that it is a good area for mediation. I do. Very
I think
personal.
People don't quite realize often, if you haven't been to court, that court is, as much fun as it is justice delayed is justice denied. And invariably, people come into court expecting something to happen, and they're told, how's 6 months from now, what can judges do? I mean, the judges who are currently seated appear to be overburdened already. Is there why do you want this job?
I don't know that it's an overburden. It is allowing the attorneys time to develop their case, and I often feel it's unnecessary. There is given a little bit too much time. I always tell my victims when they come in, because Scott and I but we meet our victims before we file the case. We interview them, we get to know them, and then we prepare them for what's ahead. And my line that I tell every single one of them is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I have to prepare them for the time of length that's going to happen from start to finish. And I give them 1.5 years to 2 years before it's gonna be over. And I have a case right now, my victims were in court today, 4 of them, and we put it over for another month. And that was me begging the court for an earlier time because they wanted me to go out to April. And I'm like, no, I don't want to go out that far. I want to do this earlier. And obviously defense attorneys need their time to develop the case. I think they're given a little bit too much time. And I think a judge needs to look at each individual case. You know, a DUI doesn't need to last a whole year. A DUI can go to trial a lot sooner. Murders take longer, or this and that. I think each case needs to have an evaluation of where are we at and can we do this faster.
In civil law, it's abused ridiculously. It is probably the first paragraph I wrote when somebody asked me 9 months ago, put down what it is about the system that you want to see changed. That was, I think, my first paragraph, because I've been so frustrated in my 30 years. A lawyer comes into court, in civil court anyway, and they say, oh yeah, I've got a conflict, or what, they make it up. And then the judge, oh yeah, they hardly even make them justify it. And that is justice denied. So in the civil area, it's really abused. And if I have the honor of becoming a judge, I will, in a courteous way, make sure that the attorneys follow the rules in the procedure, the time set in the procedure. Extraordinary circumstances are understandable, but by somebody just coming, hey, I'm not ready for this, I need 3 more months, not going to do it.
It used to be, back in the day, I've been around a couple of days, that cases went out, civil cases particularly went out 5 years. Wasn't unusual. And so you'd have, and there's actually a law in California that says the cases have to be tried within 5 years, which used to be, so it still exists. And so they would have to get a waiver of the 5-year rule when cases were 5 years old. You know what happens in 5 years? How many memories? People get sick, people move. I mean, it's, as he says, it's justice denied. Yeah. It's basically justice denied. And, it hurts the plaintiffs worse than the defense.
I agree.
But I think all of this, what we're talking about right here, though, is part of why this is, some people may look at it and say, well, it's not that hard of a job or whatever. But, I mean, if we're talking about the personality characteristics, you need to not only do what we just talked about, but facilitate resolutions in terms of a mediation, looking at a case, whether it's civil or criminal, which side is actually sort of malingering here? Can I push the case along? It requires life experiences, but not only life experience, specific personality traits. And so, these are important jobs, and they're difficult.
And people who have been in court every day, Tom, Clint, I know you both know this as well. I mean, there are candidates, Mr. Morgan's candidate, opponent, touts that she is a professor, and she's never been in a courtroom. She's brilliant. I have no doubts in her intelligence whatsoever. And forgive me, Mr. Morgan, and I'm not trying to be negative on her, but she made a statement recently that kind of irked me a little bit. She said, anybody can be a judge. I did not do that.
That was for emphasis.
Brought down
Emphasis.
the house.
Right, literally, that was for emphasis.
This is part of our process for all the forums. 1 second.
Nice.
I tell you.
Yeah, she was watching with the camera.
Sorry.
There we go. Oh, there we go. Got a little light. Not everything, but enough, I guess.
We need more.
Oh, there we go.
Where's the other one?
There's the books. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right.
Oh, here we go.
There we go. Well, we're moving on. Moving along.
That's all you need.
That's really, yeah.
So,
We had a question from some of the teachers about bail reform. Are we at a point to transition?
One more time.
About bail reform.
Bail reform?
bail.
Bail reform.
Bail. Yes. Yep. Go for it.
Excuse me. We both
Okay.
Same thing.
Well, we would say thank you
supposed to be there
for joining us as long as you could.
Downtown.
We're going to transition in a moment, but thank you. And we'll see if you want to come back 26th and 27th
Yeah,
next week. You
yeah.
should be here.
Have
And
more-
thanks so much.
You're going to invite a new group of people?
Yeah, and we'll have more
voters?
candidates as well. So
Great.
good to
Are
see
you going to send an email out for that?
Yeah, we'll send out an e-blast.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, you guys.
Yeah, that's what I was planning. I wasn't even, I don't have my super suit on like these
No, I know.
guys to
Bring your suit
answer
next
these
time.
questions. Yeah,
We'll check you out.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
Mr.
absolutely.
President,
Yeah.
if you will allow me
Sure.
just to finish what I said
Oh,
prior to
absolutely.
the
I'll
lights
cut you
going
off
off here,
before the lights went out.
And Professor Dellinger said that anybody can do this job. That offends me a little bit because she might be well suited to be a Court of Appeals judge whom they read and write briefs every day.
Right.
But to be a trial court judge, it's being in the courtroom every day, and you can sort of develop this intuition of when someone comes to you and provides you with a motion, and you can look at it and you can tell that if it's a genuine issue or if it's something just to sort of increase the cost of litigation for the other side. Or you're doing this just to stall for more time. And that takes time being in the court dealing with a whole myriad of lawyers. That's important. In fact, Mr. Mendel just walked in here and I noticed he's a friend and a very good defense attorney.
Oh,
That's the answer to your bail question, by the way, later.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yes.
Well, do you want to ask the bill?
Thank you.
Question?
Thank you for being here. My question is about bail reform, and I'm just going to read a little bit from an article that was published in LAist by Sharon McNary, and I quote, "Los Angeles County is moving ahead with a bail reform pilot program, despite warnings from criminal justice reform advocates that the program's reliance on computerized risk assessment tools will perpetuate racial discrimination against defendants." Can you speak to this?
You want me to address it? Because my wife works for Sheila and they're working on it. The problem was a couple of years ago, it was all about money in the county. It was just, there was nothing for each.
Would you mind standing in?
I'm not running, yeah.
Thank you.
But the thing was that they had a high bail.
Tell us your name also.
My name's Jonathan Mandel.
Okay.
I do defense work,
Okay.
criminal defense. But what happened was about 3 or 4 years ago, there's been movements in Brooklyn to make it based on individual characters, not on the nature of the charge, likelihood of danger to the community and likelihood of flight. And they're starting to apply it. My understanding is, I'm not giving away secrets, that Judge Oda is creating, who's the presiding judge of the criminal courts, is creating a crew of judges who will be handling bail. And the reason this is coming up is what's affecting all of us, which is called risk assessment. It affects whether we get people in any kind of crime. The assessment on a sex crime is, are they likely to do it again? And risk assessment has evolved in the last 20 or 30 years, primarily through SVP, the study of sexually violent predators. That has a lot to do with it. And it's now spread to violence risk assessment, and they're trying to assess as much as they can, given the information they have, as to whether there is what the likelihood of the person reoffending. And that's the move. But they've been resisted by the bonds people because they make a fortune. What are called bondsmen or make a fortune because they have no risk. If the person doesn't show up, they have an insurance company. So they have fought that tooth and nail because it goes into what they make. But the fairness of the system is that a kid who grows up with no resources but has a very minimal likelihood to reoffend can get a very low bail. Whereas 5 or 6 years ago, the bail was tailored simply what that person was charged with. So that's where we're going. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get there.
Where
But
are
the
we
risk is-
now, for those of us who are a little lost?
It's still a
Right
cash
now-
bail system based
yes.
on the crime that has occurred. There is a
Right.
piece of paper that says if I commit a robbery, then that's, $50,000 that you have to post as bail. If I commit a lewd act on a child under 14, that's $100,000,
Right.
and so forth. So it's the bail schedule is doesn't discriminate against anyone. It's based on the crime you committed, but it disproportionately.
But if you,
Right.
Oh, yes. Accused of.
You got a defense
Sorry.
lawyer here.
Sorry,
The
sorry,
assumption
sorry.
is you do, when they do bail, the assumption is the person is
Right.
viewed as having committed
But
a crime.
cash bail does disproportionately disadvantage someone from a low income because
Right.
they can't pay that, right? So that is a broken system. Rich people of a higher income should not be allowed to only get out while they're being charged with a crime, while people of lower income stay inside. So there does need to be a change.
Here's the only thing I would say though, is just because I want to just make sure that if you've got concerns about it, not you personally, but just generally, citizens with concerns about it one way or the other, that they're focusing their fire in the correct direction. So as trial court judges, I mean, I've been in military courts, I've been in federal court, I've been in state court. I prosecuted a guy for child pornography in Iraq, and he was out of custody in Iraq while we were getting ready to do the trial, so he was walking around with an M16. During the trial, he sat in court with an M16. So trial judges, we just implement the system to a large degree that we're given, right? So in terms of changing or making changes, those sorts of things, we're gonna get a memo, hey, the system's changed, you're doing X, Y, and Z today, and sort of that's what we're doing at our level.
If I may add two quick things. One is that you notice that the person who's out of custody is much more likely to be not convicted than someone who is in custody. Because when you're in custody, there are all sorts of issues. You have shitty food, you have no exercise, you look like you're guilty when you walk out. Hasty food. That's a huge issue when you talk about wealth, is that someone can come out looking like Harvey Weinstein, well-dressed, even though that's a huge issue. And the second issue has to do with not only that, what was the other? The sheriff is pushing this, because the sheriff doesn't want to house people. They have enormous numbers of people, but no one wants to take the risk. The real trouble here is no one wants to make the final call, because what happens if you let somebody go who has a low risk and they kill somebody? So what you have is a system that thus far has been trying to pass it off. They think it's valid to have a system that's based on risk, but they're very hesitant because 1 out of 1,000 people commits a crime. That gets screwed down. So that's really the bigger issue, is to create a mechanism that allows for that distribution of risk.
Right. Are there any class of crimes that currently you have to bail out for that we should eliminate? Bail being, in other words, does it work that way that some crimes are prescribed a certain amount of bail, or does the judge set the bail?
There's a schedule.
There's a schedule. So
The judge can deviate from the schedule.
Right. So knowing that there's a schedule, and if it were in front of us, are there some particular ones that you all feel, or any of you feel, are these are not crimes that should require a big bailout, and only financially, because they're not dangerous, for example.
Oh, sure.
I think that's the best one, right? Because danger is the reason to keep someone away from the public, for me. Not possibly guilty, but dangerous. Because if you're possibly guilty of doing something bad, but it's not going to hurt other people.
There's a computation worksheet that is filled out that takes into account the person's rap sheet as well.
Okay.
If the person has 2 prior strikes for robbery, let's say, okay, or has been convicted of manslaughter in the past, it's taken into account. And the district attorney's office is the one who fills the worksheet out. And the judge gets to hear arguments on both sides and may or may not deviate from that recommendation, because the bail schedule is nothing more than a recommendation.
Okay.
It's what we say that this particular crime is this much, and if it involves a gun, you tack on an additional 30,000. If it involves GBI, great bodily injury, it tacks on another 30,000. If it's a vulnerable victim, tax on another 50,000. So it's very mathematical, but a judge always has the discretion to deviate. Do they deviate a lot of times when it involves violent crimes? No, because nobody wants to be accused of letting that guy out. And there was a Harris case that came out about 11 years ago, where the DA, because there was a miscommunication between a new DA and the DA who was assigned to the case, the defendant asked to be released so that he would get his affairs in order before he goes and serves his time. The DA, who was younger and less experienced, agreed to it.
It was a domestic violence case.
Domestic violence case. Well, after he was released, 2.5 hours later, he found his wife and children, and he killed everybody, including himself. And after that, everybody the reaction is, now we got to take the pendulum swings the other way. Now we got to be much more cautious. And so I think that, so I think that it's a tough question to ask, because even DUIs, if the person has multiple DUIs and you let that person out and that person drinks the following day and kills somebody, the person who lets that person out sort of gets the blame.
I'm not sure bail is the right solution, but I think that's a valid point.
And there's a continuum too that people don't even think about. Sort of they think, well, it's either bail or no bail. But I mean, there's solutions like GPS monitoring.
Oh, I'm a big
Yeah,
supporter of
and
that.
things like that, right?
GPS monitoring, yeah.
You also have to tell them about the number. They also assess the risk of showing up or not. Failures to appear.
Right.
And sometimes when you're a PD, you'll have a client who's 30 years old and he has like 18 meaning they violate infractions. They don't show up in court when they're supposed to.
Right.
I had a client recently who said that. I said, how can I ask the judge to let you go? You have 19 infractions or 19 failures to appear. And he turns to me and goes, well, that's my past. So a lot of people do that. So that's the other factor, but it's less important because generally those people disappear and they don't commit other crimes.
Where is the right spot for diversion? You know, this is now a very zeitgeisty thing. I think people know what it means when people encounter the justice system, but they are veered away from jail and towards other. I mean, should that be pre-trial? Should that be, where is diversion?
I can tell you the areas where I think it's like not even a close call is there's actually statutes on the books for military diversions where veterans can show that they've committed some sort of crime that's directly related to sort of either PTSD. And that's not just PTSD from combat, but that's also like sexual trauma that somebody might have experienced in the military. And so those statutes make a ton of sense. And so that you come in pre-trial, and there's actually courts that have been set up in many of the branches. Not sure if all of the branches, but many of the branches where you've got a dedicated docket where they're doing diversions for veterans. And so, there's clear-cut cases like that, I think.
Cool.
So in terms of diversion, part of my process during the campaign, I know we've all talked about endorsements. I don't like to talk about those just because I think you all should make your own decisions, but I've talked to the individual unions that make up the bigger ACLU. They all have apprenticeship programs, and they do not consider convictions, felony convictions, or your record when they take you into an apprenticeship program. They want people to come in, and they want to provide people with a middle-class life, because that is what they're offering in a union. You make a good pay, you make a good life, you make a good wage. And all these individual unions that I've spoken with are open to the idea of creating a diversionary program into their apprenticeship programs. I think it's a fabulous idea, and I would love to be in on that, because the possibility of this person now having a reason to not reoffend because they now have this apprenticeship program, they are making good money, they have a different way out, would be so life-changing to a lot of people.
See, and again, that's what I was saying before, which is that the first question ought to be, can we restore this person to society? That's the first question. That
right.
Diversion, can we figure out a way because they're mentally ill? Can we figure out a way because they're suffering military PTSD? That's the first question. The answer to that question, as she points out, maybe no. But that's the first question we should ask. And it isn't. It hasn't been traditionally, right? And I think that that's really the focus that needs to happen for the reasons you're talking about, right? Because if people get a middle-class life, or they get a life skills, so they can live, it's a double win, right? Society is protected, and that person has a contribution to society. To me, that's where we ought to focus first.
And again, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that's why this job's so hard. I'm actually in the white-collar division right now, so I do frauds. Embezzlement, small businesses that have had a bookkeeper that embezzled from them more than $300,000. So, I mean, you have a case that came in that was a non-violent felony, but you've got a victim that's out $750,000, right? So you still got a victim out there that you need to make whole. So you're thinking about diversion. It is somebody, it's a non-violent crime. The person probably doesn't have a criminal history, but you still got to figure out some way to get the victim whole if you can. Or
I can imagine what a hard job it is, because you have to make the call, and sometimes it's not so clear.
In sex crimes, obviously we're not talking about raping a child. I mean, raping a child, in my humble opinion, is, the first time you do it, and in a violent manner, the code doesn't give you a lot of discretion. I mean, that person's going to prison, you know? But, you know, there have been situations when I've seen somebody, you know, couldn't hold his urine and had to take a public urination and ended up being charged with indecent exposure. Well, that's a sex registration offense.
Yeah.
Well, that person's not going to find a job anymore for the rest of that person's life. And so it's very fact based, and really every single case has to be determined by, you know, and I think a good judge is a judge who will listen to both sides and use the influence of the bench to get to the truth, and basically said, do you really want to imprison this person because he had to urinate for the rest of his life with no record and a job, which he will lose once he starts registering as a sex offender? So those kind of, I mean, that's an easy call, obviously, but, you know, but it takes somebody with a little bit of experience, and I think courage to take a risk on people to do that. Homeboy industry, I think, is a great way to have people, you know, Father Michael has done a tremendous amount of work to, you know, but he's got rules. You want to go to homeboy industry, you got to remove tattoos. You gotta distance yourself from your gang membership. These are things that he requires, and I think that we have a lot of flexibility in terms of working with people, but we also have to take risks.
Yeah, I would say, getting to the truth, you want to get to justice, right? That's the key. You want to get to justice. What we're really talking about here is what's just. What's just? What's just to the person? What's just to society? What should happen, right? And if we distort that concept through politics, you're going to end up with the wrong answer a lot of times, right? Rather than really thinking about the kind of issues that we're discussing here, right? That's really where you need to focus, right? I mean,
Great. Thank you so much, judges, for coming. Hope to be judges soon.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
We're all really enjoyed it, and we'll post this to our website.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, I think it was focused on Clint the whole time.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my intent.
That's a wide shot.
Oh, is it a wide shot?
Yeah, you're all in there.
Good to see you again.
He set that up after I was sitting here.
I know.
Pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We got a couple of congressional.
Thank you.
And Rudy.
I'll take off pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, let's jump out there. Let's,
Thank you. Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Hey, man.
we'll get all three of you guys. Yeah, all three of you guys.
Why don't you do those two by themselves? Because they're.
Okay, but then you're going to be all by yourself.
I don't know.
Huh?
I'll be.
Well, I mean,
I'll be great.
jump in, guys. Let's get rolling. Running for 30th?
Yeah, I'm running against you now.
The two of you are.
We've had great conversations in the past, so this is actually kind of
I
fun.
know. It's not fair. He needs all. Oh, that's going against each other? That's great. Well, join us as we interview our 30th Congressional District candidate tonight. I think we have Mr. Mark Reed and Mr. Brian T. Carroll. Welcome. And it's always a pleasure to see you guys. So tonight, we'd like to hear a little bit about each of you opening, and then we can ask some questions. So, Brian, you want to go first? Go for it.
Great. So my name is Brian Carroll. I'm running for the California 30th Congressional District. Part of why I'm running for office is just I want to return us to a kind of a back to basics congressional representation where the people are directly involved in every step of the way. My role as president of the Neighborhood Council is kind of the model that I'm foreseeing on a federal level, because right now we can make comments and letters to our elected officials in the city, but we have no way of really doing it for federal agencies, and that is where we need it the most. With our democracy, influence in democracy trickles up, whereas every good idea implemented on the federal level starts somewhere in the states first. Every good idea in the states starts in a town first, and every good idea in the town starts with the people first. So what I want to do is kind of expedite that process and kind of make sure that our neighborhood council system that's already in place can be scaled up for federal representation. If you include everybody, you can solve the big challenges, because that's, if you continue that line, the good ideas come from individual people. You have to open up that source so that they can directly influence policy for the city that they're in, for the community that they're in, for the nation that they're in. So that's why I'm progressive. I have progressive values, but I have a local focus. And with that, we can solve anything. We can solve healthcare that way. We can solve housing that way, transportation. If it starts on a local level, we can implement it big. And that's why I'm running.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Reed. I'm running for the 30th Congressional District as well. I'm a lifelong resident of the San Fernando Valley. My great-grandfather actually came over Barham Pass on a buckboard in a horse. So we have strong family roots here. I come from a military family, so we believe in constitutional, conservative principles and values and not party, how would you say, party principles. So what you're saying is very, very, very relevant to what I've been talking about for a long time. If you remember, Eric, when I came the last time, I spoke about the homeless issue. I've been speaking about the homeless issue for over 6 years now. It's gotten worse since the beginning, since I started talking about it because of policies. The federal government has a lot to do with that. We can do HUD reform. We can institute, as the judges were talking about just prior to this, the mental health institutions. We need short-term and long-term mental health institutions. We need to create a co-op partnership between the feds, the state, and the counties and the cities in order to create a compulsory program to get the worst of the worst off of the streets. Because this is about a community, like you're saying, you know, from the bottom up. The federal representation should be representing the district first and not a party. Because I'm not a party guy, even though I'm a registered Republican. This isn't about Republican or Democrat. This is about values. It's about family values. It's about community values. Where do we stand on these? The major problem that most everybody is facing in the community is a health hazard and a safety hazard that has been generated by a homeless situation that's misclassified because it's really a mental health and a drug addiction problem. In our faith-based organizations, the city, the county, there's programs that are helping the people that want help, but the people that absolutely don't want help are being left on the streets. And we're losing 3 people a day dying on our streets in Los Angeles at this point. So there's many focuses, and I look to answer some questions and get into the other focuses as well on national issues, international issues, foreign policy issues as well, because I'm well pressed on it. I come from a business management background. I've owned my own businesses since I was 26 years old. I'm semi-retired now with passive income coming in. So for me, it's about returning to the community that's given me so much. A community that I love, a community that I was born and raised in, that I have 5 generations of family members here. I have 11 grandchildren now. I have my wife of 42 years. And it's time that we have representation that represents, as you said, Brian, represents the district first. You know, forget this party policy hackery that's going on right now. When are we going to have a federal representative that represents the district and is not so focused on party, politics?
Great. Let me ask you, jumping in on the question of, the federal role in the homeless crisis, because I think we all know that there's a homelessness crisis, and I think you mentioned one aspect, and there's certainly the housing aspect as well, because we do have a shortage of affordable housing. Both of those things exist, mental health problems, people in the street, but the federal role is being discussed now, and what would be a good way for the federal government to provide support to California and the cities? What's being, I think Ben Carson is the guy who speaks for the federal government about this, but what do you think would be the appropriate way for the federal government to weigh in and help out?
Well, HUD needs to be completely reformed at this point, and this is what Ben Carson came here to look at. Because of the policies in the state of California, the HUD funds have been cut by 75% because it's a waste of money. They don't have real programs. Mitch McConnell in Kentucky created a program of individuals coming out of rehabilitation, drug rehabilitation, to get housing through HUD. And it's a wonderful program. It's working quite well, but it's a system to where your federal representative has to sit down with the state representatives and the county representatives and the local city representatives and implement programs that are working. You can find all kinds of models throughout the United States that are working in different regions. Houston has got one, and I believe Eric Garcetti is bringing in the leadership from Houston to talk about what they did there. However, it has to involve a certain compulsory program. But at the same time,
what do you mean compulsory program?
Compulsory meaning that you give the individual, you start enforcing. There's a couple laws on the books. You have the Latterman-Pinter-Short Act, which needs to be revisited. That was created back in Ronald Reagan's days when he was governor of the state of California. That's still there. Laura's Law gives the state the ability for conservatorship. So if somebody is mentally incapable of taking care of themselves, they can go through the court process. However, When the ACLU sued Orange County and sued Los Angeles County, the settlement was you have to provide beds if you're not going to allow people to sleep on the streets, if you're going to enforce the vagrancy laws. So what we're doing now is, as the judge has eloquently pointed out, 1/3 of our prisoners are mental health issues, another third are drug addicts, another third belong in prison because they committed crimes that they
But
shouldn't.
you were saying reforming HUD is the idea.
Reforming HUD is a major one in creating the short-term and long-term mental health. You need certain judicial reform and prison reform in order to give the judges and the courts the ability to look at a person who has a history of drug use. And you say, look, you have a history of drug use, but you broke into this house. We're going to give you this opportunity to do a 2-year, 3-year, or 5-year program versus getting convicted for a crime and going to prison. What the judges were talking about were great concepts.
But do you think that the federal government is going for that now?
The federal government in certain states, based on the representatives advocating for programs, do have it. There is money there because you have the money for drug rehabilitation because of the opioid epidemic, and you also have the housing. You mentioned affordable housing. Affordable housing is, you go back to the 80s in the state of California, it was a major no-growth period from the 80s all the way through the 90s. We need to revisit that mentality of how do we start providing more homes, because it is a basic supply and demand.
Right.
We have more people living in the state.
Right. Let me ask Brian if you have a follow-up on that.
I do, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
I mean, we do need more homes. So you're talking about the Boise v. Martin decision out of the Ninth Circuit that the Supreme Court denied cert for. And yeah, I mean, it's clear cut. If you cannot prosecute people for living on the streets, if there's no place for them to survive or to live, I mean, that makes perfect sense, unless there's more housing, unless the city can provide that housing. The solution to that is to find housing. So the thing is, though, we actually have enough housing in the city and county of LA to house everyone here. It's just that they're emptied, and the people who have these properties as investments, and they're all empty units right now. They're not being extra taxed on those things. There are enough empty units of apartments and houses in Los Angeles, and that's true across the country as well. There's empty living quarters all across the country to house everybody who doesn't have a house. So, although I am a capitalist, I believe in structures and all that kind of stuff. I do think that there are failures. One of the tenets of capitalism is if something's not working, you have to amend it. You have to do it. And we talk about that for everything with companies and everything, except for if the system itself is failing us. So we need to make modifications. So there's enough empty spaces for everyone to be in a house if they're on the streets. But the disparity between having these empty spaces and having people living on the street is ridiculous. Federally, we can move into action through HUD to be able to make either a nationwide tax on vacancies. If the apartment is empty and you're just holding it as an investment while someone else is sleeping on the street, you should be taxed at the very least. I'm going to give you a local example as well. So one of the things I liked about the SB 50, Senate Bill 50, although I didn't like the bill itself at the end of the day, but one of the things it did is it implemented a big program, but said that you can have a local focus and a local solution for these stuff within 2 years if you can figure it out for yourself and still meet these benchmarks. That's what I kind of want to do with the entire federal government. It's like, and that's federalism in my view. That's how federalism can actually work, where you set federal policy, regardless of the issue. In this case, it's housing and homelessness. And you say, here are our benchmarks, here is our plan. We give every city in the United States where we're going to implement this, in every state, 6 months, a year, depending on the project it is, to implement your own system that does X, Y, and Z. If you can do it for your local community, then you have the right to do it. But that's how you set federal policy while still recognizing the needs of individual communities. One last thing I will say is that while I appreciate the mental health focus on it, we can't focus on mental health as a solution for the unhoused and housing crisis if part of the reason why they are suffering from mental illness and addiction is because they are living on the streets. It's a cyclical problem and you need to stabilize people now. And we have the empty spaces to do it.
I don't know how much you've gone out and talked to the homeless, but I've gone out extensively and surveyed them, interviewed them, found out what their problems are, and the mental health and drug addiction is rampant. You're looking at AB 57 and 47 in the prison realignment, 7 out of 10 of them are ex-convicts. It's a danger, it's a health hazard, it's a safety hazard in the community. The individuals that are on the streets, the majority of them are living from welfare. They do get welfare checks, they have a P.O. box, so they're getting their welfare checks or subsidies of some kind. They're also panhandling, and because of 47, they're able to go out into the stores, and per incident, they can't go over $950. But what they do is they go into a store, they steal $800 worth of stuff, and they go sell it for $200. They can do that as many times as they want throughout the day. We need to enforce the law and order.
Well, is there a federal, I've heard that argument before it comes up. What is?
Yeah, on a federal level, you know, what you're talking about is actually overriding states' rights issues. I mean, there's a limit to what the feds can do. There's a limit to, I'm a landowner, I'm also a landlord. And I wouldn't want the city of Los Angeles or the county of Los Angeles dictating to me to put somebody inside of my house if I just wanted to sit there because it's an investment. If I have an investment, do I want the county to come in and say, because this person's homeless, you now have to house them? But yet the city and the county of Los Angeles is going to have no liability on a $800,000 house, and this person happens to trash it, and it costs me $200,000 to $300,000 to fix what the person trashed. This gets into a property rights aspect as well. Now, if you're talking about creating, you know, complexes like they did in downtown Los Angeles or other areas, we have Section 8 housing where you build complexes where you can let people move into there. But at the same time, you still have to attend to the mental health and the drug addiction problems that are facing these individuals that really don't want to move into a house.
But the vacancy tax question, you brought that up, I think. Is that something that you think would be, because if it's true, and I assume it is, that there are, you know, units, you look downtown, you see buildings full of what might be luxury condos, I don't know, and then you hear that they're not all full. Do you think that, like Brian said, there should be a vacancy tax or some kind, or you have to protect property rights?
Okay, so you put a vacancy tax on a unit that's being downtown Los Angeles or Santa Monica that's going for $4,500, $5,000. Name one homeless person that's going to be able to afford that rent. Section 8 housing won't give you a voucher for that rental either. So the problem is housing costs so much because there's a lack of supply. And at the same issue that I'm talking about is putting somebody in there that can't afford it and they destroy it, it'll cost you more. It costs you less just to leave it vacant. So now you're going to tax them because it's vacant. What does that do to the rest of the rental units there? It raises it up because now you're putting another cost factor into the rest of the units.
May I respond? So you just mentioned, like, I don't know how much time I spend talking with the unhoused, but I will say no issue in my life that I've worked for in the public sphere has dominated my life more than this issue. So I've talked to a lot of those members of the community. I don't just ignore people as I walk down the street. I talk to people. I give resources when I can. But also, just to put a button on it, I was briefly unhoused myself. So in terms of like knowing, you know, where the mental health comes from in those problems, listen, you go a few months living out of your car, and I was never chronically homeless. I was mainly acutely homeless in terms of those definitions. And just after a few months, you start to realize, like, your mind starts to warp a little bit, and you're starting to see things a little differently, and you're getting angry, and you don't have anywhere to put that anger. And that was only for a few months. If I look at the entire unhoused population, I'm looking at a bunch of people who are walking around with trauma that we could have prevented. And it doesn't matter how we do it. One way we're not going to do it is by warehousing a bunch of people in a place we don't have to deal with them, in the desert or wherever, you know, the current administration is proposing that Garcetti is currently negotiating. Well, we got to
eliminate. Is that what? Because I was curious. Literally, is that what they're suggesting?
That's one of them. Yeah, that's one of them. Of course, getting law enforcement more involved is a major goal with this administration. A lot of things. And especially in Los Angeles, where over 50% of our budget goes to the police force, and we have the largest prison system on the planet right here in Los Angeles County. You know, we keep talking about property rights and property values, and none of that includes humanity. None of it includes people's right to exist, and none of it, all it's about is taking certain members of society and siloing them from other people in society. And none of these solutions are going to exist in a vacuum, because the unhoused population, what gets people to experience homelessness is as individual as the people themselves. And so it's not just like, oh, we'll just do mental health and then the problem will be solved. Or we'll just get the police more involved, or we'll warehouse people and then the problem will be solved. We're still gonna have these problems because the problem doesn't exist out of nowhere. We are currently trying to house more people at a lesser rate than the people are falling into homelessness, and we can't keep up with it. So why can't we keep up with it in LA? Some people will say, well, they're busing a bunch of people in Los Angeles. There's no evidence to back that up. In fact, the only person I know who traveled to Southern California because it would be easier if they were unhoused is me. And at this point, because that's what I said 8 years ago when I moved to Los Angeles. Now, because a few people took a chance on me, and of course, I'm a white guy, so I have a certain privilege that other people don't. I'm now the president of the Studio City Neighborhood Council, but, especially within this area, if people saw me 8 years ago, they'd be saying the exact same thing that people say to these people now, which is like, they can't be reformed, that guy has mental health issues, that guy's a drug addict, that woman is whatever, and we shouldn't help them because they can't be saved and they should be bussed out or they should be arrested. And if we're gonna keep approaching a problem from a property rights aspect first.
Wait a minute, are you implying that I'm saying that?
I'm not saying, and I'll say this, I'm gonna defend Mark Reed.
I'm not implying that in any particular way.
Let me-
There's an element, because this is a multi-pronged issue pertaining to homelessness. Homelessness comes from many factions.
It does.
Okay, your faction, you're describing one. I can describe two of my brothers that got heavily involved in drugs. One was an attorney. He finally snapped. There was a mental issue that went on with both of them, where their mind and their structure got pushed to the point where they couldn't handle life anymore, and they ended up in the streets. So I understand the multiple facets of it, and it has to be a multiple facet issue. When I'm talking about creating a 30-day triage center to get the worst of the worst off the street, I'm talking about the individuals who are dropping their drawers, taking a dump right on the sidewalk, wiping their backside on a bus stop. I don't think you ever did that.
No.
No, you ended up having some hard times. You ended up on the street homeless, and it's difficult in this city to get housing that's affordable. I agree with that. This is where two of my daughters, I have 3 adult children. My two daughters are single moms because they made the wrong choices of guys. Both of them bought houses over in a town called Oakhurst. One of them bought a house of 5 acres, a 1,400 square foot manufactured home. Her house payment, including taxes and insurance, is $570 a month. Okay, she moved to an area that she could afford. My other daughter moved to the same area in Oakhurst. She bought a house, a 3-bedroom house on a half acre of property. She paid $160,000 for it. Her house payment is $1,000 a month. They can work out there, and they're doing great. In Los Angeles, to think that you're going to house individuals that don't have the skills without offering an ability to create the skills is ludicrous. And this is when I say the 30-day triage center, bringing the worst of the worst in, is you give a full battery of assessment. Do they have mental health issues? If they have mental health issues, you're going to have some kind of short-term and long-term facilities, because you can't just give them drugs and say, come back in a week. They're not going to do that. If it's a drug problem, you have to have judicial reform and prison reform to actually deal with the drug problems in a more effective way than what we have going on now, because that's a revolving door. So on my website, I have a very intense layout of a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year programs. 2-year program is mental health and vocational training. That's for a minor one. For one that gets in further, is facing some kind of a prison sentence or a jail sentence. You go into a 3-year program where you give them, again, mental health, vocational training, job placement, and you start implementing transitional housing, because they're going to need it at that point.
Yes, they will.
The 5-year program is a very intense program where you're going to skip mental health, the vocational training, nutritional training as well, job placement with the businesses throughout the valley. You can start as a pilot program in Los Angeles. Because Los Angeles County, the state of California has 257,000 homeless people. Los Angeles, I believe, is 55,000 individuals. Yeah. And so you look at it and say, how do we fix this? It has to be a very intense program, because from arrest to conviction, it costs $100,000. Housing a person in prison is $85,000. So for $185,000, I'm sure that local resources supplemented with federal resources, with HUD money, and also short-term, long-term prison, or not prison, the mental health institutions, would be able to give the individuals the resources, training, background, and support that they need, because we're wasting money right now.
Yeah, if I could. Mr. Reed is actually 100% right on those numbers, and any problem that we face can at least be better if you just gave that money to the individual people. Now, I'm not saying we should do that, but I'm saying that anything south of that is going to be better than currently what we're doing. I will, say it's great. Mr. Reed is actually I feel better on this issue than a lot of Democrats I know, so I will give you the compliment there. I'm just saying that all of that stuff sounds great, but it also has to start with housing, because without regulating people and stabilizing people, the other stuff is not going to happen.
It's a good segue into a question about infrastructure, because you mentioned that you had a family member who couldn't afford to live in town, so they moved to a place where they could afford to live.
Right.
The rent was lower, the mortgage was lower, everything was lower. But then the travel to work is longer. And as we've heard, if you have a big city that is run by people who work, they have to be able to live in the city. Or
yes,
this
gets further than this gets further.
I think one of our constituents was asking how, given the current congressional gridlock and lack of willingness to work effectively from either side, it seems, I don't know exactly, how can we get an infrastructure bill that's going to address those concerns so that we don't wind up with, the San Bernardino phenomenon where people have to live 100 miles away.
You know how you have economic zones. I honestly believe when I win this seat, which is we're projecting a win, because the numbers are right, I'm going to be the chairman of the Congressional freshman class. That's what I'm going to advocate for. From there, I want to become and I'll advocate for within the first year, the chairman of the Republican Congressional Caucus of the state of California. And until we get the mayors of each city and county and the county supervisors and get them on board and create economic zones where you're able to place people in affordable housing in a county or a city that can house them and afford to house them. Because Los Angeles has cost so much. I think LA Times came out with a figure that you have to bring home $153,000 in order to be happy in LA. You're not going to take somebody off the streets that has a drug addiction or has a mental health issue, automatically get him into a job that's going to bring home $153,000. Without major subsidies, it won't work. So this creates a leadership need within the state of California, within the Congressional Caucus of the state of California, to figure out how can we get all of the counties to work together, to work on the homeless issue and affordable housing issues within the entire state of California, not just the city of Los Angeles, but the entire state. Because up in Oakland area, you can rent a 3-bedroom apartment for $500 a month. The problem is economic zones, like you're saying, Eric, is how do they work? Where are they going to get the employment? This gets into regional vocational training as well. When you start looking at what is the employment, what are the needs of the districts, what are the needs of the counties, you can start vocational training of these individuals going through the programs. But it's going to take, like I said, that leadership in the congressional aspect of advocating for the money to buttress it up, because the money is there. There's the whole opioid epidemic, there's billions of dollars there. The state of California has got several billions of dollars for mental health. County of Los Angeles has still got money for mental health as well. Every other county has got certain amounts of money for this. So how do you create a battle plan where everybody works together rather than singular regional? Because as you were talking about, Brian, coming from the ground up, it's coming from the district out. When I say my district, the 30th, I look at that and I go, it's the county, then it's the state, then it's the country. So the state of California is something very primary to me, is how do we create certain golden aspects within the state, once again, pertaining to affordable housing, mental health, vocational training, and helping individuals rather than just incarcerating them, because it's not a criminal, how would you say, thing to be homeless. No. It's a human tragedy to be homeless.
Any comments about infrastructure and how, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, this plays a lot to what I think about, like, okay, so being a president of neighborhood council, but I also moved around a lot, when I was growing up. So I lived in Florida and Connecticut and out here, and I was born in California. And, throughout all of this is like, well, what is community? Always trying to find community. And by moving around so much, you don't really get a sense for that. And so I've always had a hunger for it. And, part of if I were to design a community from scratch, you need people who, maybe have single family housing, but you also need renters. I'm a lifelong renter. You need people who can go out to restaurants, but you also need people to work in those restaurants. And if they're going to work in their restaurant, you got to have places for them to live in the town, so they aren't coming an hour away. And so we either live in communities or we don't live in communities. And again, I'm not, trying to say that you're saying this, but like a lot of people would say that, like, well, you shouldn't be in the valley. The valley's too expensive. I moved somewhere else. A lot of people can't afford to move. You know, they need to stay, there's a reason why they're in a certain area. They know the area, they know where to work, they know, there's a lot of people who are unhoused here who went, to middle school in Walter Reed Middle, and, they belong here. And, we shouldn't be kicking people out, rather we should be building the infrastructure and community so that everybody on all income levels, hopefully they're not too disparaged, but of all income levels, of all different people, whether they're salaried employees or service officers or students or whatever, they should all be in the same kind of community for whatever form that takes. And that's going to look different in everything. And so when you have to look at it like that instead of looking at it from the top down, which is like what committees will be a part of, what kind of things can we do that. If you focus on community and you focus on like, okay, so we have Studio City and our district goes to the west of the 405 where it's much different over there than it is over here. And so you have to really develop, how to get people to actually live in this community. We need public transportation to get them there. That's an infrastructure thing. You need to stop defining cities by what their cars are. No other city in the entire world has, just a car-centric culture. That's LA. And I think there's a way to do that at the federal level. Green New Deal is one aspect of it where it's going to put a real focus on alternate forms of transportation. It's going to frame policymaking for every other thing because everything is everything. Jobs is about transportation. Transportation is about climate. And all of those things play into community too. So in terms of we want to be able to make infrastructure that works for the people who live in this area, and that's going to vary from where you are. For the 30th Congressional District, that means making infrastructure that connects public transportation to the rest of Los Angeles, because right now it doesn't. You've got one single red line that it turns into an orange line that goes further, but there's nothing going on south on the 405. It's only going to get worse when the Olympics are here. We need to build this kind of infrastructure now so that a bunch of people aren't displaced by the Olympics as well. And we need to have a focus on this because right now it's single-family housing all the way through. We have the second biggest metropolitan area in the country, and it's predominantly dominated by, I believe, 70% single-family housing, and we have no public transportation. The public transportation that we do have, we have a first-mile, last-mile problem. Yeah. It's great that we have the Metro bikes, so we can go from one place to the other, but those are the kind of ideas we need to start implementing now, and not sit around twiddling our thumbs while private corporations come in and put scooters everywhere, which is a very private solution to a public problem. So infrastructure needs to be more connected, and it has to be public transportation.
Let me ask you a question about how to pay for it, because I've heard people describe the 405 as a great example you brought up. We got a lot of people moving through that corridor, and we need to fix it. They tried making it wider. The rate was exactly the same. They just filled those spaces. Yeah. So the idea invariably comes up, well, we're going to have to pay for it, so let's move the people who can afford to pay over to the left in a fast lane, and then they get a transponder, and that's called, whatever that's called, pay for.
Yeah. Express.
But then the price goes up, it's called congestion pricing.
Right.
Now, what do you think of that? Does that sound like a policy that is going to help, or how do we pay for it?
I'm going to tag on to the whole infrastructure aspect of the question, because infrastructure just isn't roadways. Infrastructure is our electrical grids, it's water, and alternative energies, of course. We have over $700 billion worth of infrastructure needs of repair and replace of existing infrastructure that's crumbling in the state of California. I want to hear that, but do you have a view on the congestion pricing, or is that not something you... That's taxing people for using public roadways that have already been paid by our taxes, so you're taxing them once again to use it. I don't agree with that.
It's even worse than that. It's a regressive tax.
So
I 100%, you do too. It sounds like I 100% oppose any sort of...
I don't agree with that.
I don't like regressive taxes.
This is where, you look at what this representation, the one it's been in there for 22 years. When he came in 22 years ago, the Canoga Corridor had massive amounts of high-skilled, high-paying jobs. Those have all moved out of the area. They moved over to Palmdale, Lancaster, a lot of the military contracts are over there, or they've gone completely out of the state of California as well. So we have to look at a congressman or the representative as how do we retain or help retain the high-paying, high-skilled jobs, because we have the greatest universities here. We have a brain trust that's unbelievable. So how do you keep those here? Because when that corridor was disassembled, now you're looking at another 100,000, because this district covers 720,000. The San Fernando Valley is 1.8 million people. How do you account for the massive traffic that's been built? It's because these people that are buying houses at $700,000 to $1.5 million, they have to have a high-skilled, high-paying job. If it's not local, they have to leave the area. It's in Santa Monica now, downtown Los Angeles, or over in Palmdale, Lancaster area. So now there's more roadways that are being utilized just to go to work to maintain the cost of their homes. So you have to look at the economic infrastructure as well as how is the congressman retaining research and development, because we need more research and development dollars brought into the facilities in the San Fernando Valley. We need to keep the high-paying, high-skilled job here. Some of that is the failure of both sides of the aisle in the state of California of the infrastructure dollars that you're talking about. The gas tax, the percentage that stays at the feds versus coming back to our state hasn't been readjusted in 60 years. That needs to be re-looked at now that we have more cars that are electric, are getting way more better gas mileage. We need to look at that and say we need to have that money back. But once again, both sides of the aisle in the state of California didn't advocate for the DOT grant money, the federal DOT grant money. They brought back, I think it was $23 million in 1 year. And that was it. And how much gas tax do you think we send to the feds and it goes to other states versus coming back to our state? This is where, like I said, this is not about a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is about an advocate for our community. It's an advocate for our state, an individual that has a background experience as well that knows how to do it. I have this background. I've been the national rep for American Indians for 15 years dealing with government relations. I've owned my own company since I was 26 years old. I've signed the front and the back of both checks. I've had several people working underneath me. I've been flown throughout the country talking on diversity issues, business issues, and so forth. I've testified in front of the FCC on 4 different occasions about vertical integration, consolidation, making movements. I've received accommodations from federal officials about my leadership skills. This is what it's going to take, is having a thorough idea and being able to implement the ideas.
This question was about congestion tax, congestion prices.
I
just want to go back to that.
Yeah, I kind of got into the infrastructure aspect.
You're like me, you get passionate. You can go.
Brainstorm a little, right?
Yeah, so I want to go back to congestion pricing because it actually kind of segues nicely with my, in general, view on civics, I think, in general. You cannot have any system that punishes people without an alternative. And there should always be correction before there's citation. In this particular way, the congestion pricing that they want to put on the highways in Los Angeles, it's only a matter of time before they do that for the whole country. If you don't provide people an alternative, then you're just taxing poverty. You're just taxing, people who are disproportionately affected by it. What we need to do, by putting a bunch of public transportation in, especially, something that runs parallel to the 405 or underneath the Santa Monica Mountains, it's like that would take care of your congestion pricing problem. Because it doesn't matter how big the clog is. If it's a clog, there's no water going in it. So whether you widen the lanes to this much or keep it like this, if there's still a congestion of cars there, it's not going to be affected if you just widen the lanes. We need fast moving. There's that picture that I always like where they show a street full of cars and then they show the same street with the same people of those cars in buses instead. And then they show the exact same picture with those people on bikes. And it's like you can just see how much the congestion is not people at all or not commuters. That it's the machinery that we're bringing to places.
Right.
The public transportation, if we do this right and if we leverage certain things like the federal grant money and stuff like that into the local level, we can do away with congestion pricing. We can make Los Angeles Los Angeles should be the envy of the world for public transportation, being the second largest metropolitan area in the United States. It should be. It used to be, and it isn't anymore. And so congestion pricing, just to do a punitive measure or a taxing measure instead of giving actual solutions, it's just a regressive tax on the people who are affected by it.
Okay, that's a great point. Question about the Green New Deal, as it's referred to, which I think refers to a specific proposal, but I think it also is wider. It applies to the climate crisis, that we have giant pieces of Antarctica or the North Pole, cracking off. I read the New York Times yesterday. What should the federal government be doing? do you have a view that's?
Yeah, can I take this first, Devin?
Go ahead.
So the Green New Deal, what I like about it, and I absolutely support it, I want to see it implemented.
What is it,
yesterday.
actually? Do you want to give us?
So, yeah, it's not a proposal really. What it is it's an infrastructure framework for how future bills should be considered. So it's two main things that it hits on. Yes, it's a climate crisis solution to try to figure out how we can, on every aspect of society, be more climate conscious to avoid this imminent, problem heading towards us. But it's also a mass worker protection bill. Because one of the problems that was happening with climate change and dealing with it was that you would say, okay, we're not going to do any of this stuff anymore, so all these jobs are going to go away. And that's not what the Democratic Party has ever traditionally stood for in terms of just like cutting out workers' rights. It does, we've gotten a little muddy lately, which I'm not a big fan of. But what it is, it's about making sure that we can implement all of these more climate-centric and sustainable policies across our policymaking, but then also make sure that the people who are directly affected by it in jobs and everything aren't left to just fend for themselves. So it's a people-first kind of climate action policy, and it's not just about like, okay, we've implemented the Green New Deal, now climate is solved. What it is, it's like we implement Green New Deal similar to like the New Deal. It wasn't like, here's the New Deal and here's the policy. It was a framework and an infrastructure bill that was, that like informed how other bills were being thought of and debated. So Green New Deal, now we're just saying like, okay, here's our modern time. We have a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere, but we also have a bunch of workers that are being crushed under the weight of corporate tyranny. And so how do we square those two things together? Because one of the problems with being a progressive is that I have to acknowledge that sometimes our policies can be at odds with one another. And so that's why I'm a civics nerd, because then it's like, okay, I like going in there, zeroing in on what that conflict is, and I like to try to figure out where that can be squared. That's my thing. And so, one of the things, I hate to bring him up because I haven't brought him up a lot, but Brad Sherman, the current incumbent, he touts himself, he's running on being a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. The problem with that is that when the Green New Deal came out, I was ready, because I read all these bills. I love it. I was there. I was actually vacationing in Wisconsin. And even on my vacation, I ended up reading this bill. And so I read the whole thing, and then I immediately the next day called Brad Sherman's office and said, like, where are you on this? This is great. This is a slam dunk. Have you read it? And they're like, well, maybe he'll read it in a weekend. He hasn't had time yet, blah, blah, blah. It's not that long. It's really only a few pages long. And then I called like 2 days later. Maybe he'd do it then. Haven't read it. 2 weeks go by. I'm not a sitting congressman. He is. It's his job to read and stay up to date. Besides that, I knew it was coming because I followed this stuff. I knew the date it was going to drop, and he probably got it sooner than me. It took him 2 weeks to then say, yes, I'm endorsing it. And now he's running on being a co-sponsor of it. So this is the kind of stuff where I'm saying, like, this, no offense, but the district is predominantly blue. But it's not enough to just vote for Democrats who are just going to, say all the right things and vote a certain way. It's about fighting for people who are going to fight for the policies, not just like come into work, stamp your card, go home, raise money from corporations. It's about, I'm going to fight for the stuff that I believe in. I'm going to vote the same way too. But I think, honestly, if I'm lucky to represent the 30th Congressional District, if I just slept for 23 hours a day and just voted the way Democrats vote, I would have 90% of the experience that Brad Sherman has had for the last 23 years running this district. So that's, long story short, that's the Green New Deal.
When we talk about climate change, I want to address two things. First of all, the district it appears to be a predominantly blue district, but it's actually not. If you take the registration of Republicans in the declining states that came from the Republican Party, it outnumbers the Democrats by 20,000 registered voters in the 30th district, yes. This is where I've reached out and I've created coalitions with the Russian-speaking Jewish community, the Persian Iranian-speaking Jewish community as well. And I have all of your endorsements to back it all up. It's a matter of creating the coalitions within the district because they want representation. They want somebody that's interested in their concepts and ideas. When you look at the China RX, where China's manufacturing the majority, they control 85% of all the active ingredients of all the generic drugs that are manufactured in the world. So this is a national security issue with America. We don't produce penicillin, we don't produce vitamin A, B, C, D, or E. We don't produce the antidote to anthrax. All of our military medication comes from China. There's a lot of things that are on the plate, but getting back to the climate deal and the new Green Deal, we have to think broader and bigger, because the United States is one of the 7 continents in the world. We produce less CO2 than we did in 1980 because of the free marketplace and filtering out with the cars and the industry and so forth. So it has to be a global outlook and a global approach to, I call it simply global pollution. Because if you go to China, and I have a brother-in-law that lives in China, has a manufacturing plant there, they can't even breathe out there. You can't even go swimming in water. It is so bad. Even finally, this administration put some money into a sewage plant in Mexico right over the border, where they were dumping trillions of gallons of raw sewage right into the ocean, and it came up right up the West Coast. So you look at it, and it has to be a world perspective. How do we get the rest of the countries, the rest of the continents, to start being environmentally conscious of water, land, and air? Because we can do everything here in the United States and stranglehold our economy based on the new Green Deal, or we can think bigger and reaching out to the other countries that are China and so forth, and get them to start cleaning up and being more environmentally conscientious. This is the approach that has to be taken at this point, because if we keep focusing just on America, then we stranglehold our businesses. They want to shut down all the coal plants. What are you going to do with all the employees?
So are you suggesting linking with other countries?
You have to incentivize other countries to start thinking more environmental of water, land, and air. How do you keep it clean? Because these other countries are horrific, and they're polluting of the world. So when you think about environmental or the climate change aspect, look at it as a world pollution aspect. And it's not a carbon tax, it's not this, it's not. How do you get all of the countries throughout the world to start caring about the same world that we all live in and stop polluting it? Because we're pretty clean here. We're way ahead of the curve of any other country out there, including all the European countries, everywhere in the world. So how do we get them all on board to start being more conscientious about what they're doing to the environment?
One of the ways we tried to do it was with the Paris Climate Accords. And we set benchmarks for, the United States,
the U.S. economy.
The United States does not have a place to stand on to lecture the rest of the world in climate. And while we're the only country, it used to be one of two, it was us and Syria, and now it's just us who were able to pull back from the Paris Climate Accords. The rest of the world, we put our trust in the rest of the world, and they put our trust in us. And we said, see you later after that. So I don't know what standing we would have now to go to the other countries and lecture them on this, this exact issue, when the rest of the world put their trust in us to be at least a part of something. I don't think it went far enough, definitely I did not, but it was something, and definitely without being in it, we're at zero. So I do think we're producing less carbon now, but at the same time, we need to be able to, there's other aspects than just putting pollution in the air.
Yeah.
The Paris Accord agreement throttled back the U.S. economy to allow the China and the rest of the they call them developing countries, to come up to the level of America. So it throttled back the economy.
That's
not fair to the United States. It's not fair to our economy, period. Our
It's
country,
never implemented when the United
So are you
States
saying that you
pulled
thought
out.
it was a good idea to pull out of the Paris
because it
Accord?
was a bad agreement. The intent of the agreement was there, yes, to deal with environmental pollution. Absolutely, that's there. However, the way they went about doing it, of throttling back American, the American economy, so other economies can build up to our economy, that isn't how you do it. It was a complete wrong approach.
It's an interesting question because it gets to the question of executive authority in the branch versus the Congress, which has been very zeitgeisty recently because, I think the current president, it's fair to say, has exercised, he's pushing it in a direction of
In the same way that every president has done
power.
in the 20th century.
They all do,
Yes,
right, exactly.
they do.
And so Congress keeps trying to hold them back and say, whoa, we need to be declaring war as an example, not you on a one night.
Yeah.
But what do you say about that? I mean, do you think, what are your theories about how we can get all of them, the executives that is, to be more collaborative? Because at the moment we see something like...
Well, it's not collaborative at all. empirical. There's a certain amount of kind of person who has said that the president should be basically a king, ruler of this country, where, Congress is Article 1 of the
But are there
Constitution for a
times,
reason.
Brian, when
Yes.
executive?
Of course there
So
are.
when are the times when you think a president
Not every
should-
time.
Like,
That's
for
a-
example,
yeah.
one example from recent times, and I won't get the name wrong, but
Sure.
I think it's Suleiman. They sent a couple of Predator drones into Iraq, and they took out a bad guy who was a powerful bad guy.
You're talking about Soleimani?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. Is that an example where it was appropriate, or
No.
is that an overreach?
100% no, because the problem was, and they came out with this later, the justification that they used to use that force was the AMUF from 2002 to go after Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And like that justification can't be used just carte blanche for everything. That's what makes for for a tyrannical president. And we're both running for Congress, I hope. I'm running for Congress because I think Congress needs to be that authority with the country. 230 years ago, we rebelled against a tyrannical power for the precise reason to have self-rule.
Let me just jump in and say, look, if we should rely on Congress to get it together and make these important, hard decisions, I'm not saying it should be the president. I agree, maybe it should, but we have a Congress that is bifurcated. It's either one set of guys and gals or another set of guys and gals, and there doesn't seem to be much.
Well, let me say this just because I gotta run. The problem with Congress, first of all, we can't even, the Congress is always willing to grant war authority. They're all the more happy to do it. They do it all the time. There's only been like a couple times in the last 100 years where Congress has not authorized some use of force, not a declaration of war, but some use of force overseas. They've always done it because they love it. I would love a Congress that's not so cavalier about giving war powers to anybody, but they do. And knowing that, the executive branch, if they can't even meet that standard, just to ask permission, then we have no system of government. Then we just have an executive branch that's run amok, who won't even ask the simple question, can I do this? And the answer is always yes. So if they can't even do that, if they can't even ask Congress for permission for the use of military force, then they're not going to ask permission from Congress to do anything. And we're already seeing that in this administration.
Before you leave, do you have any questions for Brian before he hits?
No,
I think he
I
has
was
to
just
go.
going to talk about the commander-in-chief of our military has authority granted to him by the Constitution to implement for national security issues up to a 60-day with a 30-day retreat, pulling back. He has to give a Congress within 48 hours a complete briefing of what they're doing and why they're doing it. To think that taking out the number one, I think Soleimani was a terrorist. I completely disagree with you. He was a terrorist. He killed over 1,500
I didn't say he
Iranians.
wasn't a terrorist.
He killed over 1,500 Iranians in one of their protests, his own people. I look at it and say, okay, they say he killed 600, military of our military, United States soldiers. Okay, that's in battle over there in Iraq. I can almost say, okay, it's kind of justified. He's in battle, Iran's in there, there's a battle going on. Fine. But this guy was murdering his own people in his own country to keep the control over the people of Iran.
Okay, so
The guy is
Somehow it's always the United States' job to clean it up.
But he was in Iraq. Soleimani was in Iraq organizing the attacks on our embassies and our consul generals.
Which they never provided proof of to Congress.
It's there. It's there, trust me.
Let's trust the government. That's the argument
Well,
from
that's-
the Republicans.
It's not trusting the government. They gave the briefings. I've seen the paperwork on it, and the briefings are there that he was organizing. He organized the attack on the consul general that was there. He's the one who's organized it. He was in country. He was floating around freely and willing.
But that's the
So
problem.
let me finish. So do you allow the commander of a terrorist organization, which the Cut Force over there is considered a terrorist organization, it's been sanctioned that by the United States, do you go after him or do you allow militaries to come in and now you have more deaths going on? I say you cut the head off of the rattlesnake and you kill it. All right, so you take that command out. That's all he did. It's something that I do have a certain amount of respect for this military at this point of the command, and they're being given leeway by the commander-in-chief to do what they know is best. That's taking out the command structure of these terrorist organizations and not allowing the people to come in and battle it out with each other. And then you have collateral damage of just people wanting to live.
It's a fair point.
There's no
Let me just
question.
ask a
And I don't
question.
think you should
Yeah.
deregulate the military. I mean, like, that's, where does that, even with murder suspects, and we do like, one of the biggest justification for the death penalty. It's like, well, if you saw the case, then you would agree that these are bad guys. These are bad guys. Every single time we want to push back on like, hey, maybe we don't want one person controlling every aspect of the military, the argument is always, well, what would you do? Would you let them go? Would you do all this? And it's really like where the line is then. Are we just always going to trust that they have the knowledge and we don't? We can never voice an opinion about it. We can never push back. We are just going to sit back while America just becomes more and more militarized. That's what we're going to do because we trust it. Because we want to trust our leaders. And we want to say like, well, there's always a reason
But
to
shouldn't
do
we
it.
trust the
There's always a
congressional
reason
30th?
to do it.
Should we trust the congressional 30th candidates? I mean, they're the
What?
government too, Should we trust you guys? I mean, you want to believe.
I think you can trust me if your opinion of the military and use of military force is to not give a blank check every time we just want to take someone out. That there's some sort of process that we just want to at least, before we can, I'm not even, at this point, I'm not even arguing for cutting back the military budget.
Right.
I'm not even arguing any of that. I'm just arguing like, hey, maybe it would be good if we had a process.
Yeah.
Maybe it'd be good that like the way things are written in a constitution or the way things have been written in code or, we don't have a king in this country for a reason. But every time it's like, oh, tough guy, yeah, took out this person. It's like, oh, then we don't think that guy's a
All
terrorist.
presidents like to start a war during elections.
They do.
Something.
They do.
on all
And they've
sides
done it
because
every
makes them look
single
strong.
president since World
But
War
I have
II.
a question that's on point.
I got to run.
All right, just very quickly before you leave.
Did you agree with Barack Obama taking out Osama bin Laden?
No.
You didn't agree with that?
Okay, well, that's your other record. But let me say this, though.
It was
before
also
you-
different. It's a different scenario.
different
One is a state actor and the other one is not.
I don't want to go into the weeds on that, although I
Sure.
appreciate the comment and I appreciate the question.
Sure.
But I want to ask this because this is a relevant zeitgeist, I think, question, which is that we make decisions about things through the news we gather and we get. I've noticed that the way people gather news these days is different than the way it used to be. It used to be, and I'm not saying better or worse, I'm saying
Yeah.
different. It used to be, for a brief analogy, people would sit around the TV, watch CBS, NBC, or ABC, watch the evening news, maybe Nightline at night. But now what we've turned into is a culture where you still have local news where they're doing the freeway chases, and I actually look at the local news for because they try to be in the middle. But you've got MSNBC, you've got Fox, that it's like, I'm going to ask you directly, and I bet you're both going to say both. I watch them both. But
I actually do.
you do. Do you watch both of those two channels?
I watch all three of them, but
Okay.
I don't consider.
So you're
them
news junkies like
they're
the
not
rest of
news.
us.
No, they're not.
But they're not
It's
news
entertainment.
agencies.
Yeah,
Those-
but I'm telling you, my mother, and people I know, and all sorts of people are they side up. They go in, and then they're watching instead of the news, which is, so you can maybe make a judgment based on facts. What they seem to be watching is one side's prosecutorial channel. I mean, and the other side has the exact same channel
same
going
thing.
the opposite way. What do we do about that?
This is why I testified, and I did this it started 20 years ago. The last testimony was 15 years ago in regards to vertical integration and consolidation of our media that started off with Michael Powell in President Clinton's era of time, where it allowed the vertical integration of media. They owned huge swath and segments. At this point in time, 8 global corporations own 85% of everything you see, read, and hear. They have an agenda. And they put it out there constantly. So I watch them just to see what's happening so I can understand other people's opinions. But when I want facts, I actually go to think tanks and I look at their information. That
But
they
is
put
it
out.
good for America that
It's
we
not
have
horrible.
2 strong channels and a middle, or should we have?
Well, there's no
can't
middle.
outlaw
Hold
it.
on. I mean, there's no middle. They all have a bias of sensationalism. Every single one of them, all 3 of them. That's what they are. They forget the parties. I watched CNN for a long time. I watched MSNBC, I watched Fox, and when I do watch it for any stretch of time, like an hour or 2 hours, it's the same topic all day. Because 24-hour news stations, they're built for one thing and one thing only, and it's like global crisis, like 9/11s. If you have a 9/11, it's great to have a 24-hour news source. If you don't, absent of that, then news is created. Where you have we're talking about a boat or a cruise ship that's lost for all day. We're talking about a plane that went down. We're talking about that for 3 months, When these things are not focusing on a global tragedy, they should be dedicated to local civics and education of the public. That's what they should be dedicated to. Because if there's nothing to talk about that day, they will create it. And then it makes it a problem. And then they report on the response to making that problem. And it's just cyclical and garbage. And citizen journalism is great.
Well, you look at, Mike Bloomberg.
I gotta
right
run.
now. He
Thank you,
has-
Mr. Carroll. Mr. Melendez, get in there. We're putting you in. We're putting you in, Coach.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Brian. Good job.
It's always a pleasure. Brian T. Carroll for 30.
Yeah, you have,
Good to see you, Rudy. Rudy's going to jump in because I want to keep the conversation going.
you have Mike Bloomberg running for the presidency of the United States right now, and he has Bloomberg News. He has 1,700 reporters. Okay, 1,700 reporters, and he gave the dictate to all the reporters that they cannot investigate him or report on him. This is where news agencies, we're completely lacking investigative reporting anymore.
Yeah,
we
I
have
believe
universal thought process.
Was that hold back on reporting on him because they didn't want to give him free press?
No,
Oh,
because
the
of all of the NDAs that have been written up, stuff that they know. He just said, no, if you want to go after the other opponents, you want to go after President Trump. But this is the problem when news agencies or reporters, a lot of his reporters really got ticked off about it because you have real journalists out there that want to dig into a story, that want to come out with the truth. Because whether or not, you agree with the investigation of Biden, right? Should he have a free pass because he's running for president if he did a quid pro quo in 2016 or 2015? No. If we're going to be law and order, it's applicable to everybody in equitable fashion. And that is, it's anybody who is suspect of breaking the law should be investigated by our FBI, and if it's international, the CIA, and it should go to the Department of Justice for prosecution. So when you have news agencies that are being controlled by a presidential candidate and they say do this or do that, or it's an opinionated commentary, you're not getting news anymore. You're getting fed information to make you think a particular way.
I think we do need both because you want opinion. I like opinion pages, but I want facts, and so I think that's what we need.
I want facts.
Now, let me just take a brief moment to introduce Rudy Melendez, who's running for the Assembly District seat 46, if I'm not mistaken.
City Council.
Oh, sorry, City Council. That's right. Thank you. I got a lot confused. He's running for the City Council of Council District 2. That's our very home turf. Welcome, Mr. Melendez.
Thank you,
Good
Eric.
to see you as usual. Feel free to give us a couple minutes about yourself. Tell us your name and why you're running for CD2, and then we'll jump right into the discussion.
Well, I just want to say I support Mark Reed's efforts to become our congressional member in the 30th District. He's a good man, and I think he made it very clear that our current congressional member in the 30th hasn't done enough for this community. Mark is willing to work with anyone if it's going to improve our district, and so I wholeheartedly support this man. He's a good guy. Eric, my name is Rudy Melendez, and thank you, stakeholders, for sticking around. I know it's late and it's Friday, and I just want to read my statement if I could. I'm your candidate for Los Angeles City Council and Council District 2. And I should just clarify that there are 3 candidates on the ballot. Voting center is open tomorrow, and you can start voting tomorrow for 10 days prior to Election Day on March 3rd. I know Eric Previn, he's a good guy, and he should also be on the ballot. And there should be more people on the ballot running for city council in this district. So I just want to start off by saying that. The South Valley communities in Council District 2 include portions of Van Nuys, Sun Valley, Valley Glen, Valley Village, and Studio City in North Hollywood. CD2 is a uniquely diverse district with a broad range of business and industry, retail and restaurant space, legendary theaters, creative arts, music production, hair, and dance studios. Council District 2 residents are experiencing some of the best and worst of times in the history of Los Angeles, with investments in new luxury housing, commercial businesses, and public-private developments flourishing throughout North Hollywood. This brings the potential for new jobs and new homes for CD2 residents. And yet this rapid development is leaving many South Valley residents behind as we see increasing numbers of homeless across Council District 2. Unaffordable housing, high energy costs, and substandard delivery of basic city services at a time when the city of Los Angeles is afforded the largest city budget in its history is unacceptable. Council District 2 is not getting its fair share. With your support, we can bring accountability, clarity, and transparency back to your council district. On Election Day, ask yourself these questions. Am I satisfied with the status quo and the current state of affairs? What can I do what choice can I make today that will improve the quality of life for my family and for my community? I have faith and complete trust you will know the answers. On Election Day, your voice is your vote. Please consider finding me on your ballot. My name is Rudy Melendez, your candidate for Los Angeles City Council. And
Thank you.
Welcome to take questions, Eric.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
If anybody from the audience has a question, feel free to chime in. I can start by raising the question, Council District 2, as you said, spans here and there. What do you think is the, if you get elected, what would be one of the first things you try to get through City Council, to improve the way things are in our wonderful district?
Well, clearly homelessness is the #1 issue in the city of Los Angeles, in the county and in the state arguably. But I think we've talked a lot about that already tonight with some of the other candidates. So the first thing that I would do, and the tenet of our campaign, I'm a steward of the environment, I'm a California native, I'm a tree-loving Republican. We want to get this community cleaned up. We've heard a lot of talk about the new Green Deal and some really progressive ideas. And I'm very socially progressive, but I'm also fiscally conservative. I want clean bus stops, I want clean storm drains, I want clean air and clean water just as bad as anyone else. But until the city and the county show us that this community is cleaned up, just imagine what your energy bill is going to be like if everything goes to green power. It's very expensive. DWP is raping the taxpayer.
Just a quick question, because my mind skipped there. If you go solar, doesn't your bill go down? Your power bill, or?
I'll give you an example, Eric. I have a neighbor, a couple houses down from where we live. He put solar panels on his roof. It took DWP almost half a year to get him integrated into the system. So I'm all for green energy, but green energy is very, very expensive to implement and to produce. So, I think it's great, but let's start with clean bus stops and clean storm drains and all the litter and garbage and trash that's collecting on our streets because of our substandard delivery of basic services that we have in the city and the county. I mean, the city, the county, and the state is the largest budget they've had in the history. And you look around, our community is as dirty as it's ever been. So let's really get back to the basics here. Let's get our streets cleaned up. Let's get our storm drains unclogged. Let's get our bus stops cleaned up. And then talk about what's the next step. We're pushing the cart before the horse with the Green New Deal and the city advocate. Everybody, it sounds great. Look, I'm as progressive as most people. I think it's a great idea.
I think people are very concerned about, if we don't check these activities, we may be facing a faster deterioration.
I think we may be, but until you can show me that you can keep the bus stops clean and the storm drains unclogged, don't raise my taxes to clean stormwater. When you can't even maintain the storm drain at the county level and allowing all this water to run out to the ocean untreated, why do I have to pay more in taxes when I see no improvements in services? I'm a tax fighter, Eric. I'm going to fight any tax that comes across my ballot and vote against it.
Well, with that in mind, let me ask you guys, do you know about, there's two state measures on the ballot, if I'm not mistaken. There's Prop 13, not the one about property values, but the one about school funding. That is, the folks who are saying go for it are teachers and unions, and Howard Jarvis and the taxpayer people are saying don't go for it. That's one, and I'll let you address them both. And then the other one is Measure R, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the one about subpoena power for the Civilian Oversight Committee at the county jail. And some other things. But the County Board of Supervisors kind of pushed it through ahead of the vote. So even if they voted down, which I don't know if people will vote for or against, it seems like most of it's already been approved by the supervisors, which is a little weird. But what do you think about those particular ones? What would you tell your constituents you're going to do, and what would you recommend?
Well, I'm voting against Prop 13. I'm old enough, Eric. I'm 63 years old. And you know how many times I've seen school bonds go through and our school systems haven't improved? I think there's a lot of wasted money on the top end, and our teachers aren't getting the pay that they should get.
But just the devil's advocate, don't the teachers in the schools need desperately money? Wasn't that, I mean, or maybe not, I don't know.
They need money, yes. I think there needs to be a forensic audit of the LA Unified School District and see where the wastes are, what can be fixed in it. Even if you took it and cut it into 4 sections to where you can, because this is out of the federal level, this gets into more the city level, but this is just my mind thinking as a business person. How do you, what do you call it, maximize the amounts of money that we have? I've listened to a lot of the school teachers say, look, there's warehouses of materials, but they don't know about it, they don't get it to the schools, and it's not being put out there because this animal is so big and it's not being properly managed. Yeah, the bureaucracy is so huge that it's not being managed. And the people that pay for it, bottom line, are the students and the teachers. Because the teachers now, and this is something that was brought to me about the tax reform bill that President Trump, put through. And that is it took away the ability of teachers to write off materials that they supply. They can't write that off. They should be able to write it off. It's part of their employment. But they took that away from them. But teachers are now having to buy things for their own classrooms. And it's like, wait a minute. LA Unified School District's got a lot of money. They have it. So how do we take it and look at it just like a business? How do you dissect it apart, do a forensic audit of the books, and see where the money is at, where it's being wasted, and how can we implement this structure better? I think Veragosa tried doing that, and he got shut down by this man.
Come back and I'll ask you in a second about your ideas about what we might do to find the money if there is money needed, because it doesn't sound like you want another Prop 13. Do you have a view on that?
Absolutely. I don't know as much about Measure R as you probably do, Eric, but I definitely am going to vote no on Measure R. I don't agree that we need to create another layer of government bureaucracy. I mean, the Sheriff's Department has problems, it's very well documented, but I don't think Measure R is the answer, and that's all I'll say about that. Prop 13, let's be very clear, it's very different than the 1978 landmark legislation that protects property owners. This Prop 13 on your ballot in March is a construction bond. The state wants to borrow $14 billion so that they can do capital improvement projects for public education. It's not money for programs, it's not money that's going to go into the classroom. It's about construction. And before the state pays back the money, it's an absurd proposition. It's not financially stringent. I'm voting, first of all, I'm voting no. It's not, and I support teachers. I love teachers. I went to public school, okay? But LAUSD is kind of a separate deal. Prop 13 is not for the classroom kids. It's not for teachers. It's for construction. And it's just a bad deal with the banks, basically. The state wants to borrow an enormous amount of money and have to pay almost twice back. It's just absurd. And people in California can't afford another tax increase. People are struggling to make it here in California, not just in LA and LA County, but across the state.
Rudy, let me ask
Not
you
another
about that.
tax tariff. We don't need any more.
We were talking earlier about the crisis, the crisis, with the mental health component and the housing component to homelessness. And one question was, should, it's $750,000 to cover the New York Times today for a unit.
Yeah, 740 square foot unit,
I mean,
with
people-
kitchenette, it's like it's ridiculous. I can build
It's hard to
3,000
understand
square
that,
foot
but
houses.
at the city level, it's local control. All these decisions, except for, we try to get state law, but invariably they try to retain local control. If you get elected to council district, how do we grapple with this issue of, the expense of housing? And, what do we do? We've got all these covenants that are coming up. That's where people are living in places at subsidized rent, it's low, but the owners are being they're at the end of the term, and they're ready to get their money they've been waiting for 30 years. So it's hard to say to that, retiree, sorry, you got to keep it at $800 a month when you're counting on 3,000. But on the other hand, if it jumps up to 3,000, that 800 guy and gal are thrown out. And, so how can we, I know there's not one word answer to this, but what do you think about that? I mean, how do we grapple with the excessive cost of housing in California? Is it taxes really? Or is it just that people want to be here and there's demand and the contractor says, I used to charge $40 an hour for that guy, but sorry buddy, it's $55 this year.
There's a set of houses that are being built up in Porter Ranch. I believe it's 64 houses right now. The track map was approved 30 years ago. And because of all of the problems that have been put in their way and the cost factor in penciling it out so Toll Brothers can make some kind of profit on the houses, and they're still going to be $1.25 million. They finally are just getting it through, and the environmental impact aspects of it, I believe there was 218 oak trees of scrub oak, or live oak trees that are on the property. They took it to bringing.
So just so I'm clear, this is a place that took a long time to get.
This took a long time just to get there, number one, just to get to the point of building it. Now the final details are there, and the last arguments, I think they had it up to 100 houses. They brought it down to 64 houses so they could grade it out. There was 218 oak trees they were going to have to remove. I believe it was 54 of them. They ended up agreeing putting 5-to-1 oak trees back in to be able to grade this out. And this is the problem, is the regulations, the requirements that are being pushed onto home builders throughout the state of California. There was an article.
You're the federal guy, so you would try to impact.
Yeah, I would try to impact that as the chairman of the Republican Congressional Caucus of the state of California. Is how do we build more houses?
But of course, the local guys
on the state level has to look at it, because in order for you to, if you have let's say you've got a 10,000 acre site, you have to send a track map into the state of California. They're going to hang every fee that they can think of on that track map approval that they can think of. So that jacks all the housing up. You talked about the solar. Now every house that's being built, a new house that's being built, has to have a solar system on it. That added another, I think it was 50,000 onto a house, buying a house. We need to be able to.
I got your point.
Yeah, we need to get.
Because you mentioned you're a steward of the environment, and I think you mentioned CEQA, or one of you mentioned the CEQA law. That's the California Environmental Quality Act.
Right.
Of course, right now that law is being kind of weakened, or they would love to weaken it. I think it has been weakened over time, but people would like to not have to do an environmental impact report, because here we have a homeless crisis, and the developer will say, you're killing me. I got to put this up. And the longer it goes,
I'll dive into that really quick, because these transitional housing units that are being built right now, the state has taken over authority of all zoning within a community.
Right.
I went in and listened to the developer talk about the one that's being built on Topanga Canyon. They didn't have to do an environmental impact report because it's void now. They waived it because it's transitional housing. So they waived it.
So is that a good policy? Or?
No, it's a horrible policy because it's destroying community dynamics, because the community has their dynamics that they want built, what restrictions of building in that community.
But what do you say to the people who argue that the environmental laws are, that people use them because they don't want the project?
It's absolutely
true.
true.
Litigation. And the governor, and I guess the people who are trying to advance the projects, are saying, this is a crisis. We've got to put up some housing, so we're not going to go through a 5-year process. That's what it comes down to. Now, it raises questions when you see Ballmer, the guy who owns the Clippers, I think,
right,
doesn't have to go through CEQA for a stadium, because I'm not sure what the burning priority on that is, but
because it's bringing revenue into
But do you have a thought on that, Rudy? What do you think? The environment is important, but we gotta, and the communities are important, but don't we have to cut some of the red tape? It sounds like you said you do.
Absolutely do.
I mean, yeah, I think it's, I'm not, a CEQA
legal experts, but environmental regulations are important. And California has some of the strictest environmental regulations in the country, but they don't enforce the laws. So, you know, when you have an Exide battery plant that is allowed to operate in East LA for 40 years, incinerating car batteries under some like nefarious, like, you know, we'll still let you do it, you get this conditional use permit for all these years, and then now that community is devastated with all this heavy metal that's been raining down on their community for all these years. Like, what's the point of having a strict environmental law if you're going to allow Exide to continue? Now, that plant's gone, and that's an example from years ago.
Well,
but,
we're paying.
But
Paying
it's,
a lot of
yeah,
money to
and
get
so, you know, to get back to your question about affordable housing and how do we house maybe our homeless community, I do want to just say, I've been very vocal about the city and the county have a lot of property available, okay? They have USC Medical Center, the old General Hospital. I don't know if you've ever been into the upper floors and looked and seen what the upper floors look like. They're just strewn a mess with like beds and furniture, and they're not properly utilized. So you have a hospital that the county owns, and it's not properly used to provide like immediate shelter for our homeless community. At least they can get a few thousand people in there. There's beds, there's showers, you know, you can coordinate the services there, but the county hasn't done that. We also had, the city had the Parker Center, which just got torn down at this past year. The city, it could have been used for shelter space. The city tore it down. They want to build a $900 million glass tower for city employees there. Now the city and the county are talking about another hospital. And originally there was talk about leasing the space, and now the county wants to maybe buy it, and the city's interested in buying that property now. So, you know, we have to look at what is pre-existing and think outside of the box. You know, Brian earlier said, you know, we don't want to, I know it's, people will say, well, we don't want to warehouse homeless, but I just took a tour of this bridge housing facility, Hope of the Valley, over on Satakoy last week, and it's a warehouse, okay?
Well, tell us what it was like. Was
and so it's being built out.
Okay? Oh, there are not people there yet?
Not people there. People aren't living there yet. It's not open yet. It's still probably several months away. And, you know, the current city councilor, in his defense, he's doing what he thinks is right to bring this type of housing into the district. But this is the problem I have with it. The city doesn't own the property. They're renting it. And they're spending about $1 million to build it out, and it's going to cost $2 million annually to maintain it, to operate it. And it's a bridge housing. And so they're going to have about 80 beds there, approximately 60 for men, 20 for women, roughly. Don't quote me exactly. It's about 2/3 beds for men, 1/3 for women, because there's more men that are homeless. So
do we need that kind of housing?
Well, we absolutely need that kind of housing, but why are we renting it from a developer or a landowner? Why isn't the city just buy it out? And so, because they're going to, that money that they're going to spend to lease that space annually for the life of the rental of the lease agreement, I mean, that money could be better spent for services or what have you. You know, I think it's going to be good. We need something, but I just think the approach is in the wrong manner. The city has to at least use the space that they already have, like the Parker Center that was available to them, and the county has the hospital, and some of these other like vacant buildings that the city owns. You know, you have to set up some centers where people can come in and get coordinated services, at least get integrated. Mm-hmm. Now, the county has been talking about doing this for many, many years. You remember, Eric, when we were running for county supervisor in 2014, this was a topic that came up in conversation. These coordinated centers, there was going to be one built in each supervisorial district. They still haven't done that. And so, you know, there's a lot of lip service taking place by our status quo politicians at the city, county, and state. And meanwhile, the problem is as worse as it's ever been. Mm-hmm. Now, in 2016, when Measure H passed at the county and HHH at the city passed, okay, the city created a fund, my understanding is $1.2 billion Right.
And that money apparently is now gone already. And that money is to build, housing for the homeless. Now, it's been reported that some of this housing is like almost $500,000 per unit, which is, it sounds like a lot, right? It's a lot. It seems to me too much. Like, how is that sustainable? And there's clearly not enough units being built. There's almost 30,000 people in the city that are homeless or unsheltered, close to 60,000 in the county. And in the last homeless count in 2019, the numbers went up and everybody acted surprised. Like, they were like, oh my gosh, Well, I just went to an Everybody's In community outreach meeting this week, and they already think that homelessness is going to go up again this year. So, I don't have all the answers, Eric, but I just think our approach right now, what the city and county are doing, is not working very well. And the city and the county, here's the other thing.
Let me chime in.
Okay, yeah. Can I just say this real quick, and I'll let you go. As a stakeholder, as a resident, I don't know who's in charge. The city and the county aren't working very well with one another. Who's in charge of dealing with the homeless problem? Is it the mayor? Is it our county supervisor? Who's in charge?
That's your question.
I look at it, the Housing First project was done in New York back in 1992, 2002, and it appeared to be working in the first 4 years. In the last 6 years after that, it rose up 70% because it's not a housing first issue. It is actually services rendered to help them in their mental health, drug rehabilitation, and or vocational training. We keep talking about supplying houses for everybody. Okay, supply more houses, supply more houses. Okay, let's go ahead and build 60,000 houses and put them in there. What will happen is 60,000 more people will come into the city of Los Angeles and be homeless because you're going to give them a free house.
You add another lane, they just fill them right up.
It just fills it right up. So you have to look at the root causes of what's creating the homeless situation in the city of Los Angeles, in the state of California, and throughout the country. What is happening? You go into, like I mentioned before.
What is it?
It is the lack of mental health care resources. You can start it off in school, and I've said this before, is I want to implement a program within the school systems. We have these max schools now that have 2,500 to 5,000 students. Yet you have a counselor for every, I think it's 1,500, but they're not even exercising that. It's about every 4,000 students. There's not enough counselors there. The teacher should be able to recognize a student that's coming in that's getting normally high grades, dressed up nice. All of a sudden they start getting lower grades. They start coming in all, frumpy, their clothes are dirty. Something's happening with that child. So you send them into a counselor to find out what's going on, what's happening at home. If it has to go to then a psychologist to bring in the family, you're preventing a person becoming incapable of dealing with society as society is at the younger age. You're stopping it at a younger age. Because people want to address the existing homeless problem by saying, well, it's a housing issue. Well, it's somewhat of a housing issue, yes, but why are they homeless? Why can't they fit within society? You've got to address those root causes. Help them. If it's vocational training, if it's mental health, if it's drug rehabilitation, you have to have serious programs to address them. But I'm not very why, because I was listening to Rudy there for a while. You talked about the expensive. It's $740,000 a unit. They originally sold it to the taxpayers at $150,000 a unit. I can build a 3,000 square foot house for $300,000. Okay, and that would house 20 people. But this is the problem. On my website, you should go to it, Eric, and look at it. On my website, I have the homeless industrial complex.
What's your website? Tell the people.
My website is markreedforcongress.com. If you go to the policy tab in there, you'll see the homeless industrial complex, what it is, how to fix it. I also have a 42-page intense plan for dealing with the homeless situation, the mental health and drug rehabilitation of these 30-day triage centers, giving them the services they need in cooperation with the feds, the state, and the county. We need to address the root causes. Like I said, we can keep putting Band-Aids on it. You see it in New York, you saw it in San Francisco, we're doing it in LA, you see it in San Diego, in Washington State, Oregon State. The Band-Aids don't work.
Let me zero in on your point, which is a valid point. You've got somebody who's heading for the door, they're on their way into homelessness. Now, they're not mentally ill right now because they live in a unit, they have a job, they're only paying $800
I got a
a
plan for
month.
that too.
I know, but when they're paying $800 a month, and then all of a sudden, the city's covenants, and there are thousands of units like this, are up. And now, that mom and her, boyfriend with the kid are in that place, and they're not gonna be able to, the landlord puts on the door, game over,
Yep.
Now we're talking about $3,000 because, I'm gonna retire, and you can't feel bad for a person who's been waiting for 30 years, to finally get their payday. It's like the little teacher who wants to sell her house to come on McMansion because she lived there her whole life, and you go, you're ruining her neighborhood. Well, what's she supposed to do? Not sell her house? She's retiring. She's got to do something. So here comes. It's not a good situation, but it's not her fault.
That's why property rights.
So what do we do for
override
those
a lot
people?
of things.
is my point.
Well, this gets into the building planning aspect. In the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles, of the high rent units that were built, it outnumbered 4-to-1 of the affordable housing units being built.
Right.
And what is an affordable housing unit? It's actually at about $2,500 a month. That's not affordable. It's still not affordable. So how do you address those aspects? Well, we need to get into building units that are basic units for a home, just to give somebody a house. They did that a long time ago. They would build a home on a decent sized lot. They would build a house with 1 or 2 bedroom, very basic house, just to get somebody in there so they have the pride of ownership. And it's a real low cost. There's no frills. It's like the Volkswagen of housing. They can get in there. They have it. They can add on to the house if they want to. They can do what they want with it. But you keep it to first-time home buyers. The issue that's happening with these transitional housing units, I sat in on the developer's explanation of what they were doing with this Topanga Canyon one. The developer is, the banks basically buy out the property because it's a big co-op of money that comes in. It's HUD money, it's the bank's money and so forth. But the builder himself is the one that's making out like a bandit. He retains 1/9 of 1% of the building, gets a no competitive bid for remodeling that building every 15 years. That's in his contract. That same builder, once they build the unit at $750,000, that went out there at $675,000 per 740 square foot unit in there. That builder there owns the management company that manages that building. They're getting Section 8 vouchers for the people that are living in there. They have already 800 apartment complexes in the state of California that they are managing, and it's all taxpayers' money. They're not the private owner. They manage it. They're raking in money by managing the units. Then they get to refurbish it every 15 years at the taxpayer's expense.
So how do we fix that one?
Well, we need to break up that cycle. It's an insidious, horrible, corrupt cycle. It's laid out on that document I have on my website at Mark Reed for Congress.
What? Yeah.
But it has to be. Like I said, I'm a builder. I build houses.
Okay.
I can build a 3,000 square foot house with 4 bedrooms, okay, 3-car garage, okay, for $300,000. A 740 square foot unit with a kitchenette, that's a joke. You can go buy a tough shed for $4,000. It's the same size. I mean, this is where you do that forensic audit of the money. Where is it going? Because it can't be that much money. I don't know if you read the LA Times report. This goes back, I think it was 3 years ago. It was either 2 or 3 years ago. The Alvaro Street Transitional Housing Unit, they built a decking around the unit. The decking was built out at $750,000 plus. I looked at it and said, I would have loved that contract because I would have made $500,000 off it because I know building materials. I know what it costs to build it. So this is where you're getting into this insidious contractors that are working with politicians that are in the city hall that are getting these exorbitant contracts, no bid contracts. How much of that money is making it back to the campaign funds of these individuals? I'm not going to name names, but this is where that forensic audit's got to take place. Anybody in their right mind knows that a 740 square foot unit, I mean, think about it, 2x4s are $2.50. It's a piece of sheetrock is $15. 740 square feet, you've got about 3 walls in these units. Literally, there's 3 walls for the bathroom and the closet area. The rest of it's open space. How much is it costing to build that unit, really, in reality?
You mentioned open space. What about the open space here in Studio City? You know, Rudy, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know it's, you know, it's a hot subject.
Yeah, it is, and you know, I want to touch on a few things that some of the other candidates already talked about. Open space, obviously very important, and we have very little of it left. But probably the biggest chunk right now is the Weddington Golf and Tennis property, which is recently purchased by Harvard Westlake, and there's an intention to build a public-private park there for the school as athletic facilities. I know you know a lot about this, Eric, and some of the stakeholders that I hear out here tonight probably know about it. It's an important issue. It's not really being talked about a whole lot right now. But yeah, we need more open space. And you know, CD2 has a fair number of parks, but our parks are not healthy. They're not wealthy. I have a saying, in wealthy parks, healthy people. We need to maintain our parks better. We need to make sure the bathrooms are clean. You know, take care of the trees in the parks. You know, we have a really unique environment here in Studio City with the LA County Flood Control Channel that runs through our community. And it's been chain linked off in many places. And
You got the river?
yeah, along the LA River, and it's you know, the county. It's a multi-jurisdictional nightmare dealing with the river. When you have now transient homeless encampments moving in, most of my neighbors don't feel safe, you know, recreating along the river any longer because I mean, it smells, it's dirty, they don't feel safe, you know. It was a beautiful place when we moved into the neighborhood, but now it's not a beautiful place anymore. And so, you know, most of my neighbors just want Public Works to come in. They're not talking about rooting out of the people and gathering the homeless and shipping them out. They just want to make sure that if you're going to have an encampment there, Public Works needs to come in and keep those areas cleaned up. The county does a really, pardon my French, a really shitty job of maintaining the LA River Flood Control Channel, the Zev Yaroslavsky, you know, River Parkway, the LA River Green, whatever you want to call it. It's a flood control channel. It should have a beautiful path on each side where you can ride your bike and have pocket parks, and there should be some public bathrooms there and water fountains and things like that. And the county's done virtually nothing, no significant improvements with that area in like the last 70 years. So I think that's a huge missed opportunity. Nobody ever advocates for it. I'm a cyclist, so you know, I would love to see bike lanes from all through every interconnected LA County Flood Control Channel, the Pacoima Wash, the Tujunga Wash, the LA River, you know, the Encino Basin, so that we can get cyclists off the road and onto this like multimodal form of transportation, which is very, very important. And you can't ride your bike from the valley to downtown along the LA River Flood Control Channel all in one shot. It's just crazy that we don't do something there, and it's just insane. But I also want to talk about congestion pricing because it came up earlier.
Sure.
So I absolutely do not support congestion pricing, and I'll say this: LA Metro has an insatiable appetite for taxpayer money. We know Measure M just passed in 2016, and they want to come back and ask for more money with congestion pricing. I'll tell you who the two advocates on the Board of Metro that are advocating for congestion pricing. It's the City Councilor in City Council District 2, Paul Krikorian, and the Chair of the Board of Metro, James Butts, who's the Mayor of Inglewood. And they're the two biggest proponents of congestion pricing. They want you to pay more taxes to drive on the freeways. I say let's keep the freeways free, okay? So I'm absolutely opposed to that. We don't, you know, and to be completely transparent, I am not a fan of government transportation, okay? But we have to have it here. We have to have it, and what we have is, and if we're gonna have it, it needs to be like world class, and that's not what we have. All you gotta do is look at the bus stops. We've been complaining and raising hell and you know, advocating for clean bus stops in Studio City for years. And they're disgusting. Many of them don't even have architectural shading. Very few have trash cans. It's absurd. And they want to spend, and Metro wants to spend billions of dollars on this, you know, what I think is going to be an environmental disaster if they want to tunnel through the Sepulveda Pass for
What
a
about
heavy
a
rail
monorail?
train.
Wouldn't that make more sense than a?
You know, it depends on
Mike
really.
Antonovich wanted that years back, and they kind of canned that one. But
You know,
Eric, I want to get to because I like looking at root causes of problems. You know, so many people will sit there and look at our city council and our county board of supervisors, and this ferocious fight between Republican and Democrat has got to stop. And I always put this question towards everybody who sits there and looks at Catherine Barger. She's the only Republican on the county board of supervisors, but yet she seems to be blamed for everything that's going on in the county. And I've asked him, I said, well, look, you have 4 other progressive Democrats on the county board of supervisors that can override everything that she suggests and or does. They have the majority vote. This is the same thing in the city council's office. The city council is 15 city councilmen. You have 1 Republican in there, but yet we have all these problems we've been discussing in the city level.
Did you talk about John Lee?
John Lee
Didn't he
is, well, he went to
racist
independent.
Republican
Yeah, he just
stuff?
went to independent because it's a nonpartisan seat, but yet when you look at their political affiliation, they do have, everybody does, okay? There's 14 progressive Democrats in the city council. What is happening is all these complaints in the city of Los Angeles, it's run by the city council and our mayor. They're all the Democrat Party. When are we going to set public, party aside and start looking at the issues and deal with the root causes of the issues? We all offer Band-Aids. We all have great ideas. The neighborhood councils have great ideas. The city council didn't have great ideas. There's people within industry in the city of Los Angeles have great ideas, yet we're so stuck on party politics. I started a radio show, a podcast on LA Talk Radio. It's called The Voice of Reason. I have a black Southern Democrat on my show. And we talk about all of the policies and issues that are going on. We find out that we're about 75% in agreement about everything. And it's amazing when you have these civil conversations in society. And it's finding the right solution to the right problem. It's not finding the Republican solution or the Democrat solution. It's finding the right solution to the right problem. Because of my approach, Jennifer Horn and Mike Whitman, I think is there, not Brian Whitman on the Morning Answer show on 870, both of them have endorsed me. And Brian has never endorsed a Republican in his life. He's actually supporting Adam Schiff. He lives in Adam Schiff's district. But they both have come out and endorsed me. And I'll be on their show on March 2nd at 6:50 in the morning. But this, and I've had Robert F. Kennedy because he values my opinions. I've had Robert F. Kennedy on my show. I've had Michael Reagan on my show. I had my rabbi on my show talking about, hate, ignorance, racism, anti-Semitism.
Where it is, your show?
It's on latalkradio.com, and if you go to the search bar, The Voice of Reason, and you'll be able to see all of my episodes. Or go to my website, markreedforcongress.com. All the archives of the shows are on there as well, and you'll be able to see a mass amount of subject matter on there. We're just finishing up a 3-series episode. We went down to the Arizona border in Tucson, Arizona, where Pinal County is, and we interviewed Jim Chilton, we interviewed Tim Foley, and interviewed Sheriff Mark Lamb. Did you know that 60% of all the illegal drugs come through a 100-mile corridor in Arizona? 60% of all the illegal drugs in America come through that corridor. I've always been led to believe that 90% of the illegal drugs come through the ports of entry. No, I got straightened out by that sheriff down there. He says, no, this is how the press manipulates the information. The drug cartels are willing to give up 15 to 25% of their product. They know it's going to get confiscated. So what do? They send it through the ports of entry. So we have something to say, we caught them. 60% of the methamphetamines, the fentanyl, the heroin, the tar, it's all coming through this one particular corridor in America.
Let me ask you guys this as we wrap it up. We've got a few
Yes.
more minutes. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to both of you for
Absolutely.
coming out, and
You're welcome.
it's always a great opportunity to chat and hear your views. And I look forward to the election on March 3rd, 2020. As Rudy mentioned, someone mentioned, voting is basically available 11 days out, which is that
Yes.
today?
Starting tomorrow.
Starting tomorrow.
Voting
Which is
centers-
very exciting. Check it
voting
out.
centers
And then there'll
open.
be even more 4 days before widely available places to vote, so get out there and vote. But with that said, give us a 1-minute wrap up, unless you've got something you really want to share before that. And thanks again for coming.
Go ahead, Rudy.
Well, I'll just say that, I hope that you will take a critical look at your ballot and ask yourself, are you happy with the status quo, in the current state of affairs? If you are, then vote for the status quo. If you think things are going well for you in the city right now and your quality of life, then by all means go for it. I don't pander for votes, Eric, and we're going to bring, our goal is to bring accountability back to local government. We're going to hold every public work agencies accountable to get our community cleaned up. That means Caltrans at the state level, Public Works at the county level, and our public work agencies at the city level to get our community cleaned up. It's ridiculous. The city, the county, and the state have the largest budget they've ever had, and the services that we're getting are substandard. We're paying Lexus taxes and we're getting Tercel services. I'm not going to stand for it anymore. That's why I'm involved. That's been the tenet of our campaign, going back to when we first got elected to the neighborhood council in Los Feliz in 2012. We've been working at building a coalition for 8 years, getting our name out there. We got a really good shot at getting elected and primarying Krikorian out on March 3rd. I'll just say this. I ran for state senate in 2018, spent my own money. I got attacked, negatively campaigned against. I got 54,000 votes in the Senate district in 2018. The Senate district is 3 times the size of the council district in CD2. Paul Krikorian got elected in 2016 with a little over 8,000 votes, and Eric was the other candidate on the ballot, and I voted for you, Eric. We're going to primary Krikorian out on March 3rd. Right. Thank you very much.
My name is Mark Reed, and I'm running for the 30th Congressional District, and this election isn't about Republican or Democrat. This is about our community values, our family values. The economy is going great, but at the same time, our quality of life and our security of life has gone downhill in the West San Fernando Valley. So when you go to the ballot box, don't consider Republican or Democrat. I'm a constitutional conservative. I'm a Republican last. But this is about values. Think about it. In the last 22 years, are you better off under the current representation of the federal representative that's sitting in that office now? Or do you think that we can do better? I've laid out plans in this interview. I have several plans and other policy issues on my website at Mark Reed for Congress that will give in detail. My personal contact information is on my website as well. You can get a hold of me direct and you'll get the answer from the horse's mouth. The archives of all my radio shows, you'll be able to get an in-depth look of exactly who I am. I have endorsements from the county party, the state party, all the local representatives. I have the Greg Smith, the former city councilman of the district's endorsement. I have high Democrat endorsements. And in fact, we're still working on and negotiating the endorsement of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the oldest family in the Democrat family in the United States of America. This is what we need. We need people that can reach across the aisle without condemning each other and get things done. That's the leadership I'll bring to the district.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week on the 26th and 27th. Of course, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending.